Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the RTCF show. One of the final ones of the year, Sean, because
Yeah.
the season is right around the corner, and obviously things are going to change once the season starts. Saturdays we're going to be somewhat preoccupied with the game day shows. Today, folks, we are going to talk about a lot of different topics. We're going to call a little bit of an audible on today's RTCF show, Sean, because we are not going to talk about recruiting today because there's just too much team stuff going on. We have got to cover it all. So we are going to do sort of our initial planned topics for the team and college football. So we are going to talk about Marcus Freeman's comments from the opener about, or the opening practice about just the focus on, being ready, toughness, not making excuses for being day one and what that means for Notre Dame and kind of things we've heard moving, about how the things are going moving forward and all those type of things. And then we're going to make our predictions for the SEC conference this year. We're going to talk about East, West. We're going to predict championship game, conference winner, and then surprise team and team that's going to disappoint. But before we start things off, we are going to talk about just kind of looking at this, Sean, from the standpoint of the latest news with Notre Dame. And just obviously we're going to talk about Avery Davis, but we're going to kick things off with sort of not the most important news, because I think anytime a player is injured, it's an important thing, but that's going to take up kind of two different segments because of what's next. So we're going to start things off first and foremost with the news that Tyler Buchner has been named Notre Dame starting quarterback.
It's something that we anticipated, I think, in our conversations going back to the spring, and the way the staff was pleased with his development. And I, for one, because I know Notre Dame fans are split in a lot of different areas when it comes to Tyler Buchner, because, they see one thing, they see his running ability, they might not see the different levels of throws as far as different speeds and accuracy, and those might be some of the questions that they have. But for us watching him, the playmaking ability, his ability to make throws in tight situations that he showed in spring practice, and just his ability to overall impact the rest of the offense and give the offense a dynamic look, a more dynamic look than anybody else in the quarterback room.
Right.
Yeah, that was our anticipation, that eventually he would be named the starting quarterback. And I've always bookmarked, like I said, I was the one that leaned towards, I'm not too sure about Tyler Buchner.
Show me. You're in more show me mode.
Yeah. You on the other side. You saw it from the beginning. You believed in him from the beginning. And then the Virginia Tech game, for me, is really all I needed to see. Because we would get him like in spurts. Like, here's a series. There's a series. We saw a nice chunk from second quarter in the first quarter all the way into the beginning of the fourth quarter. And despite his successes on 3 touchdown drives and his failures on the pick 6 and another interception in the fourth quarter before he twisted his ankle, you saw why. You get the news today, and then you saw why Tommy Reed said what he said at his press conference, and Marcus Freeman as well. It was like you saw both sides, and they saw further development from him. And we knew it was coming.
Sure. It wasn't close, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, we knew it was coming.
You and we both have sources inside the program. Like, it wasn't close.
Disrespectful. Yeah,
but it's not disrespectful. And this is the thing: is like from everything we've heard, Drew Pine has completely bounced back from his rough spring. And Drew Pine is a guy that, from what I'm told, the Notre Dame coaching staff flat out has faith in. This isn't about Drew Pine. This isn't about Drew Pine can't play. This isn't about Drew Pine's not a Notre Dame quarterback. Any of those things. From everything we've been told, Drew's had a good spring or good fall.
Yeah.
Like I said, mentally bounced back, physically bounced back, did everything he needed to do to put himself in position to contend for the job. This has always been about, is Tyler going to be the best version of himself or close to it? And from what we've told through the first week of fall camp, we're now a week and a day in. They started Friday, August 5th. We're now a week and a day in. It just hasn't been close. And it wasn't close during the spring. And it wasn't really close this summer. And it wasn't really close in fall camp. And from everything we've been told, it's about Tyler. I've had 2 different people that don't know each other both tell me without me asking how they saw Tyler, right? So I have one guy that I know that was at practice and said, but it looked great. Had another guy that I know that has not always been a pro Tyler guy, Sean. He was like you. He was like, I need to see it. He's someone who I think is maybe a little skeptical of the dual threat nature of quarterback play. He wants someone that can throw the ball. He was telling me like, hey, look, man, this kid's had like the best practices of his career. He is rolling. He has earned the respect of his teammates. And I think that's partly why Drew has handled this well from what we were told, is because I think Drew's a smart kid. He knows, he sees it.
Yeah.
He sees what Tyler's bringing to the offense,
Yeah.
but he also knows he's going to be ready. And I think that's the thing is I've had people asking me, other people reporting this. I don't know what other people are reporting. I don't care. What I'm telling you is what Sean saw in the first practice and what Vince saw and what Sean Steyer saw and what every single intel piece I've been given is it hasn't been close. And that's a good thing. Right. And that's the thing of Sean is one of the questions we had was, look, somebody's going to win the starting job, but did they win it or did they earn it? That's the difference, because somebody's got to start. So somebody's going to win, right? It could be by default, right? If the worst two teams in college football play, somebody's got to win, right? Doesn't mean that they necessarily, did look good doing it.
Mm-hmm.
The key thing here is Tyler earned it. Like Tyler went out and dominated the position, and that's the important takeaway. And I'm also happy with the fact that they decided to get it over with as far as announcing it, not play like the stupid head games. It tells me that right now Marcus Freeman is not worried about playing the mind games with Ohio State and all this other. Hey, look, we got to do what's best for our team.
Yeah.
And and he's right. Like I just don't think that stuff has much of an impact in a situation like this. So like the team needs to know, Tyler needs to know, Drew needs to know. That way the kids aren't getting asked about it every time there's a press conference, because the longer this would have dragged on, the more it would have been asked of the players and the coaches. And look, here's the starter. Let's roll, right? And then now Tyler, you're the guy. We need you to now continue to do what you're doing. Drew, look, you're going to be important. Tom Reese made sure to say that. Marcus Freeman made sure to say that we're going to need Drew Pine at some point in time this year. And I'm almost ready to guarantee that they're going to need him at some point in time this year, whether it's to come off the bench, to rally if Tyler goes down or isn't playing well or something. Who knows? They're going to need him to come off the bench and do what he did last year, which is rally the troops, move the football, put the ball in the end zone, and give your team a chance to go out and win. And that's what Drew Pine can do. But Tyler is Sean, I've said this. If Drew Pine's a starting quarterback for Notre Dame this year, I still think they're a 10-2 football team. I do. And they're because they're not going to lose more than 2 games, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I know there's all they're 8-4 because of this, that, and the third. That's what we heard last year. Right? 7-5 because they don't want this. And then like Notre Dame's the only team in the country with injuries, or only team in the country with depth issues at a position, only team in the country that lost players from their team last year. You know what I mean? Like, go look at what happened to Georgia's receiving corps last year. Right? And so what did Georgia do when they had all that? They played a bunch of tight ends. Oh, and by the way, then their second and third tight ends got hurt.
Right.
And they won a championship. Right? Because other positions pick it up. And we'll kind of get into that stuff. But look, the reality is this is still a really talented football team, and Drew Pine is the kind of quarterback that can go out there and say, hey, look, I'm going to lead this team to victory. We can go 10-2. But the reality has always been, if Notre Dame is going to take that jump as a program with this team, it's going to have to be with Tyler Buchner, quarterback, and Tyler Buchner playing his best. And the fact that he seized hold of this job so quickly, to me, is certainly a good sign.
And then what you said a little bit earlier, is very important. The recovery of Drew Pine from his spring and to come out blazing hot in the fall helps this entire team, and it pushes Tyler Buchner. That's what you wanted from Drew Pine. Drew Pine is going to be the guy as camp goes. Now they've announced that Tyler Buchner is QB1. He's going to start to get the majority of the reps the closer they get to game time on September 3rd. Drew Pine is going to be the one working with the Tobias Merriweather, after practice, taking time with him. He's going to be the one working with the younger guys in the wide receiver room, throwing extra balls to them while Tyler Buchner is doing other things. This is going to be a collective effort because of the way Tyler Buchner plays the game, which is hard. Maybe he finds a way to tone it down. I don't think he does. I just think that's the way he's wired. At some point, Drew Pine is going to take important snaps in this season. We don't know what game it is. More than likely, he's going to end up starting a full game at some point in this season. If it's a hamstring tweak and they're facing a lesser team and they just decide, you know what, we're going to rest Tyler this week. We have the bye week coming up next week. Rest him. We can win this game with Drew. You just don't know how the season plays out. But they know that they have someone behind Tyler Buchner that they can confidently go into a college football game with and feel like they can get a victory. Mm-hmm. Do you know how great of a feeling that has to be as a staff, as an offensive staff, and as a head coach to have two guys in your quarterback room that you feel like, yo, we can go win a game every week with either one of these guys? That's a great feeling. I'm going to stop short of they're the best duo in college football because they really haven't started a game. Either one has started a full game.
Right.
But I would be comfortable saying they're one of the top 10 in the country as far as duos in the quarterback room.
Right.
I feel very confident in saying that. So
right.
With all of the mystery, I'm so glad. And this goes back to Marcus Freeman and what he said in his initial press conference on the 5th. Someone asked him about his decision. He said, no, I'm not waiting to choose a quarterback. When I'm ready to choose it and make that decision public, I'm going to do it.
Right.
And I guess Friday.
Stayed true to his word.
Stayed true to his word. And here we are on Saturday.
Right.
August the 13th. Voila.
Sean, to your point, Notre Dame has had since 2010. Actually, if you go back to 2009, from 2009 to 2020 to 2021, it's a span of 13 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
In 8 of those 13 seasons, Notre Dame has had at least 2 quarterbacks start a game. Sometimes because, a couple times it's been because of poor performance, but more often than not, it's been because of injury. And even in 2018, when the performance dictated a change of quarterback, then that guy that stepped in, Ian Book, got hurt, and Brandon Wimbush had to step into the starting lineup for Florida State.
Yeah.
We saw it in 2010 with both Dane Chris started. Tom Maurice had to start late in the year because of injuries to Dane Chris. Saw it in 2011 because of poor performance.
Yeah.
We saw it in 2012 because of injury when Everett got hurt against Stanford, and then Tommy had to start against BYU.
Yeah.
We saw it in 2014 with poor performance was the lead thing that led to that. We saw it in 2015. It was injury. We saw it in 2017 because of injury. Brandon got hurt, and Ian had to start the North Carolina game. We saw it in 2018. So, and we were close to seeing it last year. Honestly, because of performance. And so, like you said, the second quarterback's probably going to be needed at some point in time. And I think one thing you could do with Tyler, and we'll get into this as we get closer to the season, but that's where the coaching staff is going to have to control him. You can't ask him to, hey, man, change the way you play. They're going to have to change the way he plays with the way that they call a game.
Yeah.
So like against Ohio State, everything's on the table. Against Clemson, everything's on the table. USC, everything's on the table. Marshall, I'm not calling a lot of designed runs in that game.
No.
It's just, but that's what you need to do as a football coach. So Tyler Buchner, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Sean.
In your opinion, how close, because I don't know if you talked about this on any of your previous shows last year, how close was that decision if he doesn't twist his ankle?
Oh, it was a done deal, I was told. I was told it was a done deal. Yeah, I was told that if Tyler doesn't get hurt against Virginia Tech, they were ready to hand the keys over. Because basically, and it wasn't necessarily about Jack Cohn.
Right.
It was up to that point in time, because remember, that was before the offensive line started playing better-ish,
Right.
But even that game against Virginia Tech, the offensive line just couldn't protect him. And the way they looked at it is Tyler and his legs are the only thing that can survive behind this line. And because at the time, they were losing to Virginia Tech 10-0 when Tyler went in the lineup.
Right.
Jack was getting harassed again, couldn't get time to throw, and guys just weren't making plays for him. Tyler comes in, scores 14 points. They go up. And then they fell behind again. It was 29-21. It didn't matter if they won or lost that game. They were going to roll with Tyler. I was told that. They were going to roll with Tyler. The only reason Jack kept his job is not because Tyler got hurt per se, but then Jack comes back in and, leads him down that victory, and you're like, okay. And then Jack got another start, and then, of course, the offense started playing better because the offensive line started playing better because they started playing worse competition.
Right.
And so they were very close. And I believe that if Tyler Buchner doesn't sprain his ankle, I think that decision would have been made, because they would have been out of the playoff hunt at that point in time. And it was like, okay, it's time to start working to next year. So it was about losing that game. If they lost that game with Tyler in, they would have made the move. If Tyler would have led them back to a victory, they still would have made the move because he showed he's capable of even a victory. Because remember, he was spotted down 10 when he came into the game.
Yeah.
And so I think that and then he made a lot of plays. He made mistakes. He made rookie mistakes, but he also made a ton of plays. And they were ready to kind of hand the keys over until Jack came in. And I think when the way Jack played at the end, I felt like they just kind of thought like it was like, no, he earned the right to be the starter. He led us back. We're still in the playoff hunt. He's going to continue to be our guy. Yeah. There was a thought, I think, from what I'm told, there was a thought and a discussion at that time, like if this is kind of where it's going to go. So yeah, it was close. It was close. So Sean, Tyler Buchner's starting quarterback at Notre Dame, right? So that's a done deal. We don't have to talk about who looked better in practice anymore and all that. Now it's about, will Tyler Buchner get to where he needs to get to? Topic number 2, little bit less, a lot less good news. I think it's good news that the quarterback was named. Topic number 2 is obviously Avery Davis went down with a season-ending injury, and he injured his left knee today. Did hurt his right knee today. It basically is the opposite knee that he hurt last year.
Yeah.
And it was a torn ACL. And we were told yesterday that he limped off the practice field. And I got a call last night from somebody who said that Avery was telling teammates that when he got injured, it was, I believe, a non-contact injury. They heard a pop. And so I was like, oh boy, that's not good. Hopefully he didn't. My prayer was like, it was in his head because of the way he hurt himself last year. But they got their news confirmed last night after the swelling went down there. We'll do an MRI, and he has a torn ACL. So he is out for the year. And then we'll get into what it means for Notre Dame and all that. But the first thing, Sean, is just, I mean, you don't want it to happen to any kid, but it definitely stings even more when you talk about a kid like Avery who has done everything right, who's done, just whatever they've asked him to do. He played quarterback. They moved him to running back. They moved him to corner. They moved him to receiver. He never complained. He never said boo. He worked himself into he was recruited as a quarterback and worked himself into being a captain as a wide receiver. And just a great representative of what this institution is and what this football program is supposed to be about. And it's really heartbreaking to see him go down again after all the hard work he had to get back in it. But his season is now officially over.
Yeah. Speaking for the young man, hearts and prayers go out to him. It's very tough. Everything he put into getting back on the practice field earlier than expected, getting back, being ready for Ohio State when people expected him maybe to miss the first 2 or 3 games. Most importantly, what he means to this team as a captain and as a leader in that wide receiver room. There are so many facets to the loss with his injury. But I just want to focus on the young man. And this is why, as a fan, I'm very slow to be critical of any player, despite what they say. We might say some things in a game, and they missed a play or they dropped the ball. But at heart, as fans, we support the young men that are part of the program, because football is one of those sports, and most major sports are like this, but anytime you play a sport, it is almost the closest correlation to going through or dealing with life situations that you're going to get until you get beyond football and start dealing with life situations. Like, I believe it was Duke's, women's basketball coach that went viral recently. She was talking to her team. And she was
Kara Lawson, isn't it?
Kara Lawson, yeah. She was sharing with her team, life is not easy, and it's not going to get easier. It's going to get harder. Right. And we have to learn how to handle hard better. And this is just another situation for that young man. And man, the person he is, with everything you just said about what he's gone through, has never, ever complained. That lets us know that he's going to be successful. Even if he comes back and decides to play again, he's going to be successful. He's going to overcome. If he decides to go into his career, do something else, he's going to be successful because of the character and the integrity that he has as a young man. And that is a credit to him, his family. And, yes, he's at Notre Dame, but he's the type of kid, he probably would have been the same way if he had gone to another university.
True, but he does have that Notre Dame degree with him, and a kid like Avery is going to thrive with that. And I'm going to make another point about this too, Sean. This injury is a lot like the Justin Ross one. This is another reason why I will contend. This is why I am pro NIL if it's done right. If NIL is done right, and it's not being done correctly right now, this is good for young people, because Avery is a guy that had an NFL future. Now, would it have been as a middle round pick, a late round pick, an undrafted free agent? Yeah. Somebody was going to sign him and give him a chance to play professional football. That's going to be really hard to do now. Okay. Really hard to do now. And that's why I believe NIL is good for kids like him, because he would have been able to not only walk out of Notre Dame with a degree, but also an opportunity to have something to say, hey, look, you were part of a bigger, aspect that really generated a lot of revenue to this sport, to this institution. And you were able to use your name, image, and likeness to kind of walk out here with a degree, with tons of learning experiences, tons of opportunities, tons of relationships, but also an opportunity to walk out with some money to say, hey, look, I can't play football, but I'm going to go start a business. And you know what? I've got a couple $100,000 that I earned over my career in NIL that I now have the seed money to go start that business if you're smart, right? And so those are the things that I think are why I'm a pro NIL guy if done correctly. Yeah. Done correctly doesn't mean you're using it to buy recruits. That's not doing it correctly. Right. Doing it correctly is taking care of the kids that you have on your roster now. That is correctly. And giving them opportunities to work, to earn the money, to do different things. So that's my little NIL rant for the day. Sean, people have asked about Avery and whether or not he is someone who can come back, because he lost a year so you have to look at him as a fifth-year senior. Right. Because the 2020 season did not count for him. So you have to look at him as a fifth-year senior. And as a fifth-year senior, he is a kid who missed a season because of a normal red shirt, right? So he has an opportunity for a medical red shirt to be a sixth-year senior, which would technically be his seventh season at Notre Dame. I just don't know if that would make a lot of sense for him, and it's not a guarantee that his waiver will be granted by the NCAA. Right. His circumstance has to go before an NCAA committee that has to determine whether or not to give him an opportunity to play. Again, I don't know if that's something Avery's going to want to do. I don't know if that's something Notre Dame would want to do. Like, do we really want to put him back out there for this? But it's something they're going to have to decide and discuss. First of all, Avery's got to decide if he wants to do that. I don't think now is the time to have that conversation with him if you're Notre Dame. And I doubt that they will right now. It's like the kid's dealing with enough. You don't need to throw that on him. And what he may want to do right now may not be what he wants to do in 6 months. Because remember, there's a time when Sean Crawford was ready to walk away. Yeah. And he's like, I'm done. Like the lady, I'm done. But then, you get away. You're like, no, what? No, I can't go. I'm not going out like this. And, and so maybe Avery has a similar decision. Hey, you know what? Might as well get my second master's degree. Be here 7 years. Yeah. What's that old, hey, lots of people go to school for 7 years. Yeah. They're called doctors, right? Well, hey, that's Avery Davis, right? He can walk out of Notre Dame with maybe 2 master's degrees after 7 years. So that's certainly something that will be considered, but now it's just not the time to have that conversation with Avery. And now it's not the time for Avery to making those decisions. It would be an emotional decision right now. And he needs to worry about getting the knee repaired first. Can he play football? You know what I mean? Moving forward. I mean, his good knee is now the one that is, he is still rehabbing to kind of get back from the injury last year. So I think those are areas where I say, Sean, like, those decisions will be down the road. But we've had a lot of people asking about it, and it is an option. It's not guaranteed, but he does have that. Now, he would not have had an option if he would have been like Tariq Bracy, where Tariq Bracy's already played 5 years. Right. He just got that 5th year because of COVID. He's already used all 4 years. I don't believe Avery has. So Avery played in 18, 19, 20 doesn't count, and then 21. So he's only played 3 years. And then he redshirted in 17. So technically he has that year, but it would have to be one of those things that's granted by the NCAA, I believe, because of the fact that it's a medical hardship on top of the normal red shirt that he already had.
Yeah, it's tough. This game, man, is brutal.
Yeah.
It's absolutely brutal. And one of the things when you're sitting there on the sideline, I know I was thinking this the entire time I was watching the first practice. And I'm watching things and I'm like, watching guys make moves, and I'm like, man, just stay up. Just stay up. Just stay up. Just stay up. Because we talked about health and how important it was for this team to get through fall camp healthy, and specifically at the wide receiver position, and how encouraged we were to see Avery Davis being a part of that top trio of receivers that went on the field with the first group coming back from that injury. And it's, Marcus Freeman said it the best. This is bigger than a loss at a position. This is one of our captains.
Right.
And one could argue part of the heart and soul of this team. So, I'm sure a lot of players are feeling it today and felt it yesterday, and they'll get back to it and rev back up, and their focus will start to be right back on Ohio State in September 3rd.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the game. I mean, that's what you need to do.
Yeah.
And he'll be out there every day. Once he gets the surgery and he's able to kind of get around, he'll be out there every day.
Yeah.
So now we got to kind of talk, Sean, a little bit about what's next. Right. I mean, I think that's a big part of this. And that's, look, it's next man in, and you hate it and you mourn for your teammate and you love your teammate. You support your teammate. You're there for your teammate. But at the same time, it's like, hey, we got to practice today. We got to step up. We got to get to it. Marcus Freeman also talked today that Deion Colsey had a bit of a strained PCL.
PCL. Yeah. Right. He'll be back early next week.
Right. So you can't, here's the thing. The one thing about this is we're going to list you a lot of things that Notre Dame can do to be okay after losing Avery. But they're at the point now, Sean, where they can't sustain another injury or a player not panning out. I mean, it's a receiver. It's all hands on deck, right? I mean, that's just kind of where it is. Notre Dame is now down to 6 scholarship receivers. Marcus Freeman did announce that Joe Wilkins is potentially back for Ohio State. I find that a little hard to believe. I doubt that he's going to be 100%, but I have heard that he's been running this summer, and so I kind of thought it'd be more of a middle of the season thing. We'll see if he's healthy or not. I don't know what you can expect from him. He's a kid that has had 2 pretty devastating lower body injuries. How is explosive is going to be there? Is he more prone to get hurt again? There's just a lot of different aspects of this that you just need to kind of get discussed on it. So I don't know how much I'm willing to count on Joe Wilkins yet, but even if Joe comes back, that's 6 healthy scholarship receivers, 7 if you count Matt Salerno. I mean, and you don't want to be in a situation where Matt Salerno has to play. So number one, Sean, the biggest impact on this is the player that this impacts the most, more than any other on the current roster, is Lorenzo Styles. Because Lorenzo was kind of going to be a little bit of a play everywhere kind of guy. He was going to play outside, inside. He stepped into the slot last year when Avery got hurt the first time. And if you remember, Lorenzo ended the season with an 8-catch, 136-yard performance against Oklahoma State. So, obviously that's a part of the thing there is he's now an inside guy now. Now he'll still move and he'll play outside and do some things, but he's going to get a lot more chunk of his snaps in the slot now, I believe, than he would have before. And I think the second player that this impacts too is Braden Lindsey for the exact same reason. Lorenzo was going to kind of eat up snaps between the 2 positions. Avery was going to be an inside guy. Braden was going to be an outside guy. And then Lorenzo was going to take snaps of both.
Yeah.
Now you're in a situation where Braden's now got to step up and be that guy as the X. You're just going to have to maybe give you 10 to 12 to 15 more snaps a game.
Yeah.
Right. And give you high quality snaps. So to me, the first 2 thing right there, Lorenzo and Braden have got to step up and be guys for Notre Dame this season if they're going to overcome. Because Avery Davis, we talked about all the good things he did. Avery Davis is a really good football player. I mean, he's their leading returning receiver for the last 2 years. He's a kid with 60-plus career catches, 800-plus career yards. Has been a money player for them. So there's not just leadership that's got to get replaced, Sean. There's production that's got to get replaced as well.
Absolutely.
And it's going to fall on Lorenzo and Braden first and foremost at those 2 positions to step up for them.
The one thing I will say that is a positive, that I'm much more confident that this staff and this coach, Chancey Stuckey, is the one being entrusted with getting guys ready for whatever changes and new accountability and new responsibilities are coming their way. But guys switching roles, adding things to their plate, taking some things away from other plates. I'm glad as Chancey stuck it as in position along with the rest of the offensive staff to figure things out. You mentioned Georgia. And when they had these similar situations last year, they noticed that their strength was their tight ends. Notre Dame has a very similar strength. You heard Marcus Freeman really, really talk about, and Tommy Rees echoed this. Really, no, not Marcus, but it was really Tommy that talked about both of his freshman tight ends. And we talked about it in our first intel piece. Like when you watch Holden Stays and Eli Raridan run, they're going to be a problem. They might need to catch up, specifically in blocking schemes and knowing what to do when it's 11 on the field. But once they get it, the natural talent is there.
For sure.
They're going to be a problem. Sure. So I'm interested in seeing how the staff now goes about setting up the identity of this team and what is going to be based upon this injury.
Yeah. So like to me, Sean, there's several factors to this. Obviously, we talked about the two we discussed. Even at receiver, there's still more I need to see in how guys step up this rest of this fall camp is going to determine exactly what you're talking about. Because like one of the things I wrote about in my article at irishbreakdown.com was this is a great opportunity for Tobias Merriweather. And it's also pressure for Deion Colsey. Like Deion, it's grow up time, buddy. Like you got the talent, you got to stop holding back. You got to stop, not letting loose. You got to stop, just not. You can't have these bad practices, these inconsistent practices. You can't just be a guy that sometimes looks great, sometimes doesn't. You can't be that guy. You got to step up and play. So if Tobias steps up, which so far he has, if he's ready to play, 30, 40 snaps a game, if Joe Wilkins can give you 15, 20 snaps a game, if Tobias Merriweather is ready to give you legitimate 20 plus snap, 15, 20 snaps a game, maybe more, then that allows you to then move Jaden Thomas around more. And, Jaden Thomas right now is going to kind of have to learn the boundary. But if those guys step up in the boundary, then now all of a sudden Jaden can be now part of that 3-man rotation to the field. And then occasionally let Lorenzo go backside. Occasionally let JT go backside. So those guys, Tobias and Deion stepping up are huge, Sean, because if they do, then I don't think this necessarily changes your identity a ton because you still have plenty of 11 personnel stuff you can do, and look, people say, you're down to 6 scholarship receivers. That's one more than most teams playing their rotation on a game day.
Yeah.
Right. So it hurts in other aspects we've talked about in the past, scout team and different aspects like that. But you can somewhat salvage that in practice by doing more good one-on-ones and, different things to make sure your best players are going, your best corners and safeties are going against your best receivers and such. So, but if they don't step up and I don't mean step up just like, okay, they can go out there and take snaps, but step up is like, hey, look, we can throw the ball to this guy. He can go make plays. We can count on him and trust him. Then I don't think your philosophy changes a ton. I think what will have to change, even in that perfect world scenario where all those guys step up and either, because they don't have to be stars, right? I mean, Lorenzo's got to step up and be that dude. Braden's got to be consistently his best version. Then between, Tobias and JT and Deion and maybe Joe Wilkins, there's a level of production there that needs to happen. But they don't all 4 have to be dudes, right? Like that's not how it works. Like all 6 dudes don't have to be dudes. They have to just, find their roles and somebody's got to step up. And you also have Michael Mayer, who's still your guy. But even in that situation where all 6 of them prove themselves ready to play, you're still in a situation where I got to question whether or not you're able to maybe play 11 as much as you were going to, even in a scenario. So then you look at a couple other things. Number one, do you say, okay, now our 12 personnel package has to become a greater part of what we're going to do beyond what it was going to be as primarily a run game alignment? Does this mean there's an opportunity for Kevin Bauman to play more? Does it mean that Kane Barong, who right now is only really impacting the pass game because he's still working back from his injury, so he hasn't been doing a lot of blocking. It's been mostly route running. He's been having an impact in the pass game. Eli Raridan and Holden Stace have both looked good this spring at different times. They're young. They're not going to know the whole offense. So how can you fit them into certain roles? Do you fit them both into the same role? Do you find a niche for both of them? You know what I mean? So between the two of them, they can handle one type of tight end role.
Yeah.
Or do you say, Eli, this is what you're going to do? Holden, this is what you're going to do. Those are all the things that they have to think about and figure out. And you still have 6 tight ends, right? I mean, you got Mayer, Bauman, Barong. You have 5 tight ends: Mayer, Bauman, Barong, and then the 2 freshmen. So there's plenty of bodies there at tight end. Now the question there is they're not a.
And Mitchell comes back after week 4.
He'll probably be a little later than that,
Okay.
I would think. But even if he comes back, he's more of a blocking tight end at this point in time, I think, especially coming off the injury. So then it's okay, but we know they can do a lot of 12 personnel run the ball. The question, however, is can you go 12 personnel and throw the ball? And can you throw the ball to your second tight end, or is he just going to be a de facto blocker that the defense doesn't have to account for? Because that's not an ideal scenario either. When you go 12 personnel, and this is something I've complained about in the past, when they'd go 12 personnel, especially in 2020, they never threw to the second or third tight end. Tommy Tremble had a decent number of targets, but they were early in the season when he was still the starter. He got 6 catches in the first or second game.
Right.
And it was just kind of it's kind of misleading numbers. It's kind of like the Pro-Size Josh Adams numbers in 2015. Well, that was a great 1-2 punch. Pro-Size went for 1,100 yards, and Josh Adams went for over 700 yards. I'm yeah, but they didn't do it at the same time. Josh had one good game against Texas, and after that, he came off the bench and late in the blowout against UMass and had 1 carry against this team and 1 carry against it. He didn't get his numbers until after CJ went down. Right. And so you've got to prove to them. Otherwise, it's when Notre Dame goes 12 personnel, we really only got to worry about 4 guys in the pass game. That's it. Makes it a lot easier to stop them. When you don't have a receiving core that's got dudes everywhere. You don't have Alabama's receiving core from a couple years ago. You don't have Ohio State's receiving core from last year. You don't have Clemson's receiving core from 2018 to where, it's only 4 guys you got to worry about, but they're all 4 really good dudes. Notre Dame's receiving core isn't there right now. So you have to have that second guy has to be a pass game weapon at times. You have to make teams prepared to defend the second tight end in the pass game. And that's my big concern there, Sean, is so to a degree, I do think that somewhat changes their identity. Because if you're going to up the 12 personnel volume, then you have to also up the opportunities that second tight end is going to have in the pass game. And even if it's just early in the year, you force feed it against Cal and Marshall, just so the rest of the opponents know, hey, look, you can't play that. If you don't play that second tight end, look, they had combined to have 10 catches against Cal and Marshall in North Carolina or something like that. You're going to have to maybe almost force feed it a little bit early, just so it's now on their radars moving forward. So even if you have a game where maybe you don't throw them the ball a ton, the defense is calling coverage schemes to account for him, as opposed to just saying we're just going to have our defensive end run right down his throat and make sure he's he has to block him in pass pro situations. So I think all of that stuff factors into it, and also running back, Sean. I mean, the 21 personnel becomes a much bigger part of their offensive package now, especially if Logan Diggs can be ready for Ohio State. That revelation last week that Logan Diggs may be ready for the opener and Joe Wilkins may be ready for the opener takes a lot of the pressure off of the rest of it if they are in fact ready, because you now have 3 running backs ready to go. You now have 7 receivers ready to go, 6 guys that were, recruited as scholarship guys. And Matt Salerno is not a bum, but Matt Salerno is also not a guy you are going to go beat Ohio State with as a guy taking 40 snaps a game, right? We can be honest about that. But it's a situation where, Sean, where between 11 personnel, between 12 personnel, between 21 personnel, 11 personnel, 1 back. So just for a reminder who those who don't know what this means. When we say those numbers, the first number stands for the number of running backs on the field. The second number stands for the number of tight ends on the field. And then it's whatever's left over for a receiver to get to 5. So 11 personnel is 1 back, 1 tight end, 3 receivers. 12 personnel is 1 back, 2 tight ends, 2 receivers. 21 personnel is 2 backs, 1 tight end, 2 receivers. So that's what that means for those who have not heard that before and not sure what that means. But 21 personnel is a part of this too. Now, one of the things people say, well, hey, move Chris Tyree to slot. No, not an option. Chris Tyree caught, I think, 0 passes beyond 6 or 7 yards last year. 1. He caught 1 around 10, and it was a little leak out of the backfield that he was literally waiting on the ball. He's not a receiver. No. He's a running back that can catch the football. That's not the answer. Now, does that mean there aren't things you can do with him in the slot as a running back in your 21 personnel? Yeah, there are, right? There are some things you can do. There are some screens you can throw to him on the perimeter. Line him out wide in a stack formation. And if they don't respect him and get that linebacker out, then I'm running a now screen to him right now. If that linebacker gets out, then I'm running. We got read cons. We got pass concepts. So what is that? It's an RPO. You're in your 21 person. You got Audric Estime, Logan Diggs, and running back with Tyler Buchner, who's a weapon at quarterback. And if they want to clog the box, then you get that ball out there, and your receivers better block for Chris Tyree because you now got him in space.
Yeah.
I mean, there are things they can do like that, but he's not going to be running seam routes. He's not going to be running, taking the top off of a defense with a post route. I don't believe we're going to see that much, if at all. We'll see him on wheel routes. We'll see him on out cuts. We'll see him. I mean, he catches the ball and do those things well, but he's not a guy that's just going to go out there and run corner routes all day and, post digs and post curls and, things like that. Just not his game. But there are things you can do with him. So I think that was already in Notre Dame's offense. 12 personnel and 13 personnel is already in Notre Dame's offense. I think the only thing that changes now is that stuff from a volume standpoint has to become more prominent now. But here's the thing, though, Sean. It has to become more prominent. I'm looking more at tight end right now. Like, we're all talking about, the depth of tight end is so great. But the reality is they're in the same boat they are at receiver, meaning guys got to prove themselves still behind Michael Mayer.
Yeah.
Eli Raridon's got a lot of talent. He still has a lot to prove. Yeah. Holden Stace has a ton of talent. He has a lot to prove. Kane Barong's an athletic kid, 4-star kid, all that. He's got a lot to prove. Kevin Bauman, another 4-star player. He's got a lot to prove. So, we can talk all day about on paper they've got all these talented tight ends, but outside of Michael Mayer, those guys still got a lot to prove too. So the point is, if this is going to work for Notre Dame, it's not just as simple as plug another guy in. They got to plug somebody in who then steps up his game beyond what they've shown so far. And if that doesn't happen, then Notre Dame's going to be in trouble. If that does happen, then Notre Dame will be able to weather this storm, much like Georgia weathered the storm last year. Because Georgia's a great example for me, because Georgia last year, that George Pickens got hurt, Kyrus Jackson was banged up all year. They lost Eric Gilbert, kind of left the team for a while. Then Darnell Washington gets hurt. So what did they do? Obviously, Brock Bowers was a big part of what they did. They were able to get other receivers to step up, and then they used their running backs more in the pass game. And James Cook was always a guy that they was a pass game weapon, but they kind of upped that a little bit last year. So they were able to kind of overtake it. And then the big thing is at the end of the day, Sean, this puts even more pressure on the fact that you better go out there and run the football. That biggest way to take pressure off the receivers, run the flipping football. And that doesn't mean you're going to run it 60 times now. It just means you better be good at it to make teams respect it, to make sure that you're getting more one-on-ones on the outside. Those are the big things. So there's a lot to this, Sean. But at the end of the day, the key, other guys got to step up now. Lorenzo Styles got to step up. Yeah. Braden Lindsey's got to step up. Tobias Merriweather's got to step up. Deion Colsey has to step up. JT Daniels has to step up. Jaden Thomas needs to step up. Kevin Bauman, Kane Barong, Eli Raridon, Holden Stace, Chris Tyree, Logan Diggs, Audric Estime, they all have to step up. But the first topic we talked about is the big thing. If Tyler Buchner is who we think he can be, then I think that is a situation where the reason at the end of the day I've been so confident in Tyler Buchner is not that I know he's going to be great. I don't know if he's going to be great. But I do believe if he plays his game, Sean, he is the kind of quarterback that can put the rest of the team on his shoulders. Yeah. And that's the big key. And can I wrap up by saying this, Sean? What a great time for Harry Hiestand to come back.
Woo! Man, look, you could have – that was the best way to wrap things up. Absolutely. His impact, what he's doing with the offensive line, and the encouragement – Harry Hiestand has given more confidence to the running backs that have been here. Like, you don't understand what the running backs have been looking at and not having an understanding of what they're looking at. Harry Hiestand not only talks to the offensive linemen, you see him talking to the tight ends on running plays. And then he'll go back and talk to the running back and say, yo, this is the way it's supposed to look. So when you get the ball, this is what you're supposed to see. He's so important to the running game. Look, 1,800 total yards, including sack yardage, in the rushing game last year. I think it was like 1,870 something. And they averaged like right under 5 yards per carry. Now go to 2017 when they had the dominant offensive line.
And they couldn't throw.
They couldn't throw. And they still almost averaged 300 yards on the ground.
Yes, and averaged over 6 yards a play. A rush that year. 6.25.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you wrap that up perfectly. And I would like to encourage Notre Dame fans to have, oh, here we go again type
Right.
of point of view on what happened with Avery Davis. Avery Davis was not there in the spring.
Right.
Jaden Thomas worked the majority of his time and his reps was in the slot. He was the guy taking the jet sweeps during the spring. He was the guy running the slot. Deion Colsey was the guy outside. And then he was interchangeable with Lorenzo Style, who also got reps in the slot when we were watching practice in the spring. So this injury comes, and I think they were looking to take the next step with the offense. And what this injury does is it kind of brings them back to where they were in the spring.
Sure.
To say, okay, these are the combinations we were using in the spring. This is something we're comfortable with. Guys are comfortable with what they have to do, but now they know over the next 2 weeks they have to be prepared to add things to their plate and, go make plays. Look, we said Deion Colsey had to step up in the spring. We said Jaden Thomas had to emerge in the spring. We expected Tobias Merriweather to make an impact at some point because of how talented he is. There's nothing that is in front of us that we didn't expect as a staff and as a fan base. Like if Notre Dame was going to win a national championship, make it to the college football playoff, have a successful season, everything we're saying today that needs to happen, we expected that it needed to happen.
Right.
So this injury is not gloom and doom for this team. There's plenty of talent in that wide receiver room. Will they go out and execute and make the plays? That's up to them. It's yet to be seen. We can prognosticate all we want to. They're the ones that step on the field on Saturdays, and they're the ones that are going to have the opportunities to make the play. You talk about how we feel about Tyler Buchner, and you talk about the talent in that wide receiver room connected with the return of Harry Heastan. This might be one of the most, and I say this might be one of the most explosive offensive we've seen at Notre Dame. But correct me if I'm wrong, because if you see it different, that's cool.
No.
I look at Tyler Buchner as the guy that takes Notre Dame's offense to a point where Notre Dame has spurt ability. And what I mean by that, I liken it to Golden State, right? There are a lot of teams that average just as many points per game as Golden State. But Golden State has that ability to hit you with a quick 15-zip run in a matter of like 2-3 minutes. And all of a sudden the game is just out of control.
Yeah.
Tyler Buchner has that playmaking ability at the quarterback position where we're not sitting watching Notre Dame's offense methodically move down the field and use their physical presence and talent to just overwhelm people. No, they have the ability now in the run game and passing game to step on the field, bam, bam. Before you know it, they put 21 points on the board, and it's still half a quarter to go.
Right.
So that is something that I think Notre Dame fans should be excited about because I think that's what Tyler Buchner is going to bring to that quarterback position and the offense 2022 and 2023 especially.
So it's interesting. That was a really interesting kind of thread you kind of went on there, Sean, because I think that the interesting thing is you mentioned like you didn't have Avery in the spring.
No.
You had Logan Diggs. The expectation going into the 2022 season was you were going to have Avery, but not Logan Diggs.
Right.
Well, now Logan's coming back sooner than expected. Avery's out. And, and so you have people that can maybe step in. Joe Wilkins sounds like he may be back sooner than expected.
Yeah.
So there are guys there, but again, we both agree that the margin for error is really thin. That's the thing. And that's why the line has to play well. There's more pressure on Tyler Buchner now, in my opinion, to step up and be that guy. But that's kind of what you always hoped he would be. I think the final piece to this is I do think they need to consider making a move. I do. I don't think they can just sit back and not do something. Because like all the stuff we just talked about is fine and dandy, Sean. It's all great. All sounds good. If it all pans out, wonderful. They're okay. But this is football. This is real life. This is an NCAA, 2023 game, right? No. Where, you can just, that guy got hurt. I'm not going to save this season. I'm going to start it over. And, and you can't do that, right? somebody's going to somebody's going to have a hamstring that's going to cost them a couple games. Somebody's going to sprain an ankle. Somebody's not going to play well. Something's going to happen, right? And they need to get another receiver. Now, people say transfer. No, there's a guy on the current roster that they need to sit down and have a heart-to-heart with and say, look, man, we need you to do this for the team, and that's Xavier Watts.
Yeah.
And I understand Xavier's hesitancy. I do. And he's battling in the mix at safety. But the reality is, with Brandon Joseph, with Ramon Henderson, with DJ Brown, with Houston Griffith, with Justin Walters, with other corners that could move to safety, they're okay there. And I think Xavier, to me, gives them a guy that could, I believe, go and play now. Number one, he's played the position before at Notre Dame. They're not going to hand him a playbook, and he's like, what is this nonsense? What is this language you're speaking? He knows it all. He knows Tommy Rees. He knows the plays. He knows the calls. He knows all that type of stuff. You're going to have to promise him he's going to play, though. And that's a big thing. And you're going to have to force him onto the field. And I think that they should, because my stance on this, Sean. I've always thought Xavier Watts can play receiver. I've always had confidence in him.
Yeah.
And he can block, and he can do stuff at the very least. You can give him 15 snaps a game against Ohio State if the need is there because of other situations, and he's going to block his butt off, and you can throw him a couple screens, and he better watch out. He might be able to do something with it. Right. I mean, he can give you that. And then as he grows and matures and gets more comfortable, then you can kind of go over there. Perhaps you can cross-train him a little bit to where if there is an injury at safety, he's still prepared to go play there if the need is there. But I think at least for the first couple weeks, you got to move them. You know what I mean? Like, let them learn it. Because you can't move them and then not play them, because you're screwing them over at that point in time. Because by cross-training them, you've now taken them out of the safety competition, right? So if you're going to move them to receiver, then you need to play him a receiver. And I think Xavier can help. Now, the bummer is he's going to have to lose that number 4 if that happens, right? Because that was his number in high school, and he finally moved to number 4. He's got to move away from that. But I think he can help. I think he can play right now. I think he can give you snaps to the field. As part of he can give you some Z snaps in the slot. He can give you some X snaps, meaning he could play where Braden plays. He can play where Lorenzo does in the slot. Lorenzo can play both. So you can have 3 guys for 2. Now that also allows you to use Jaden Thomas more to the boundary if that need arises, because Dion and or Tobias are not stepping up, right? So now you potentially have Joe Wilkins, Tobias, JT, and Dion that can all play in the boundary. Tobias can also play the field if all those other guys step up. Jaden Thomas can play all over.
Yeah.
And now you've got Xavier that can play. And Xavier played some W in the past. That's not where I'd put him, but he has played some W in the past. So I think adding an athlete like Xavier Watts can help. And again, when I say help, it's not about helping you get numbers back to normal.
Yeah.
It's not moving him over there so the scout team has a better receiver to go against. That's not the move to make. If that's what you're going to do with him, leave him where he is, because that hurts your football team, because he's going to help you on defense. He's going to play on defense in some capacity. To me, if you're going to make this move, you have the ability to make it at safety. You have the ability to make it a corner. You're fine there. You got plenty of numbers and plenty of talent in the secondary. You move him to receiver, and you say, hey, look, dude, you're going to play. Yes, you got to get caught up and you got to do this, but we're moving you here with the anticipating you're going to play. The first couple practices that he's a receiver, I'm designing a ton of plays to get him the ball, just so he gets his confidence saying, hey, man, we're doing this so you can help us. So like the first time he's on the field in a practice on offense, he's getting a jet sweep, a reverse, a screen, something. I'm throwing him a go route. I'm telling him, hey, we're coming right to you, dude. Right? This is sort of like a symbolic, it's like, Sean, like when you're a kid that, shake on it, you know what I mean? Or, some kind of blood oath or whatever you want to do. You can go back in the day, like, this is our oath to you, man. We're showing you, this is how we're sealing the deal. We're getting you to rock.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to do.
That's
what I would do.
And I would reference something that I actually saw earlier today before the show. You talked about the pressure being on Tyler Buchner. I would say there's more pressure on Tommy Rees to bring comfort to this offense right now. Like when everybody's thinking about losing Avery, what needs to be done, it reminds me of what Coach Reed has gone through with all the buzz about losing Tyreek Hill. Like, oh my God, he's been so important to the offense. Like, what are you going to do? And I saw him come out today with a fullback. I haven't seen Patrick Mahomes with a fullback since he's been in Kansas City. But the first 3 plays were fullback runs and play action. And he's saying this running game has to be more important now that we don't have that guy. He is finding a way to bring comfort to his quarterback and the rest of his offense to say, we're still going to be able to produce. And Tommy Rees has that task. With all the moving parts, or whether it's bringing Xavier Watts over, which I'm all for. I think both of us were for that, even going back to the spring, And, he pushed back on it because he wanted to be on the defensive side of the ball. But if he is selfless, like Avery Davis, he will recognize, you know what? My team really needs me right now at this position. So I'm going to make the move to go back and help them in the wide receiver room. But I think there's pressure on Tommy Rees to bring some comfort to the offensive side of the ball, whether it's with certain packages or allowing Tyler Buchner to feel comfortable with everything going into that Ohio State game. I don't want it to be about, just the loss of the players and what the players have to do. This is going to come down to Tommy Rees really looking in the room and looking at all the tools he has and saying, how can I effectively put this successful offense together?
Yeah.
He has the instructions, per se, with his playbook in his mind. He has the ability, but how he goes about putting it together, is he going to be the guy that thinks he can do it on his own and it takes 4 hours? Or is he going to be the guy that's honest enough to look at the actual plans and see everything that they ask him to do and say, oh, okay, if I just follow the instructions, I can do this in no time. It's just 2 different ways of looking at it. He could look at it and say, oh, I need to go totally to the left now. Like, we don't have this. Or he can look at it and say, hey, like we said, we did this in the spring.
Right.
We worked all spring on this offense and executing it without Avery. Big loss. That would have been a little bit more that we could have done as far as switching and being more versatile and moving Lorenzo around. Probably can't do that as much as we would like to, but still, we can be impactful and dangerous and explosive.
Look, Sean, here's the deal, right? Like, Notre Dame returns 4 players that had either at least 7 catches or 100 yards against Oklahoma State.
Right.
3 of those 4 guys come back. We're obviously talking about Michael Mayer, Chris Tyree, and Lorenzo Styles. The starting field receivers from the bowl game are back, right? I mean, like, this isn't a sugarcoating. Oh no, they're perfectly fine. We're not saying that.
No,
we're saying this isn't the end of the world. But guys got to, guys got to step up. Like the Xavier Watts thing, I totally understood why Xavier Watts said no the first time. Number one, he wasn't given an ultimatum. He was told, where do you want to play? And he said defense. Why? Because he's getting a shot at to play defense.
Right.
Looking at offense, it's like, I got to move back there. I got to battle Braden. I got to battle Lorenzo. I got to battle Avery when he comes back for playing time. It doesn't look as good as safety, where I've already shown that I can play and they're going to play me.
Right.
And so I get it. That's why if you're gonna make this move, it's got to be with the intention of he's going to play, and I'm okay with that because I mean, I could be wrong on this, but I've always felt that Xavier was a better offensive player than he was a defensive player in the right system, and I think the role that you'd use him for would be one that you can definitely get some value from Xavier Watts, and then as he gets more and more comfortable, then he can do different things. But I think so. The moral of the story is, Sean, there's plenty they can do.
Yeah.
Guys got to step up, right? And, it's funny. Somebody had said earlier, like, Notre Dame hasn't had an explosive offense in a long time. And I want to be like, well, they had one not that long ago in 2017. They had one not that long ago in 2015. In those 2 years, it was a situation where they had a lot of injuries both of those years. They had a lot of injuries at receiver in 2017. They had a lot of injuries at running. I mean, there was one point in time where they're on the road playing the number 2 run defense in the country, a team that won 10 games, and in the second half of the game, they're down to like their 4th running back. Remember that? Because Tony Jones got hurt the week before against BC.
Yeah.
Right, so he was already out.
Right.
Adams got hurt in the first half. Dex came in, played a little bit, caught a touchdown. He gets hurt.
Right.
And they're rolling with Deion McIntosh. And guess what Deion does? He rips off a touchdown run.
Man.
You know what I mean? Like, because why? Because other guys around him stepped up. Brandon had a great game. Chase stepped up with some big plays. The offensive line dominated. 2015. I mean, look, 2015, before the second game of the year was over, Notre Dame had lost their starting quarterback, their starting running back, their starting tight end. Like, guess what? That was a really explosive offense. Why? You had other great players. Will Fuller was a great player. But you had guys step up. Deshaun stepped up and played well that year. CJ stepped up, and Josh Adams stepped up, and Chris Brown stepped up, and Alize Mack stepped up. And that's only on the offense. They lost Jerron Jones in fall camp.
Yeah.
They lost Sean Crawford in fall camp, who was going to be their starting nickel. So this is what good teams do. And that's the point I was making about Georgia is if you're a good team, you're going to have injuries. What do you do about it? Who steps up? And there's still plenty of guys to step up. Now, the thing I will say, they're now at the point because of past recruiting woes with Dell and being able to retain the current roster. You know, because I'm not feeling so bad right now if Lawrence Keys is still on the roster. You know, Xavier's probably still playing receiver anyway. If things are a little different, you know, you're in a situation where you now can't afford more. Like, it's kind of like, okay, Lord, you've tested us enough. We're good. All right. Can you go test somebody else now? You know what I mean? Like, you know, but they're certainly in a situation where there's options there, but the margin for error is very thin at this point in time. Very thin. And it's also, as we wrap it up, it's another really, really important reason why Tyler Buchner needed to seize hold of the quarterback job, because he is the neutralizer in those situations. Because what do they have in 17 and 15 that they haven't had the last couple of years? A quarterback that can flat out make plays with his legs. I'm talking about scrambling around. I'm talking about flat out, we're calling plays for you. Opponents have to treat you as almost like a borderline running back. That was the case with Brandon in 17, and they called a lot of run plays for Deshaun in 2015 as well. They were running RPOs back in 15. Remember, they would do that with Deshaun. They would do that the quick fade, quick out, and Deshaun would read it, and if they vacated, he would just quarterback draw. Yeah, you know, I mean, so you know, it's that's kind of where they can be, you know, and so that's why I say Tyler's got to stay healthy. He's got to play well. There's options there, but they are, and it's also great why you have a great defense.
And I'll say this, like, you hear about the wide receiving core at Ohio State, right? There's probably 3 dudes in that wide receiver room. I'm talking about dudes. They have really good players. Notre Dame has really good players in the wide receiver room, right? We've identified at least one dude in our Lorenzo Styles Jr. is a dude. I think he showed late in the season he's going to be a dude, and I think he takes the next step. Jaden Thomas has been talked about, right? From what the coaching and the staff, we have to see it, right? We have to see it. We think eventually Tobias Merriweather is going to be.
Tobias is a dude. Is he along far enough in his maturation as a player to be a dude today? Yeah, that's a question mark.
That's a question.
But he has a dude.
But, you know, just on the grand, this just goes to the wealth of football talent around this country. There are a lot of really good football players spread out across college football. Yeah. The teams at the top have more dudes. Right. Every team has really good football players. Right. Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, Clemson, Notre Dame eventually have more dudes in certain positions that elevate their team. We've talked about this. People talk about the talent in Notre Dame hasn't been there. You point it out all the time. It hasn't been the talent. Maybe at certain positions you can point out the talent has been better in other programs, but Notre Dame has been good enough to go on the road and compete against Georgia. They've been good enough to beat Georgia at home when Georgia made the national championship game and lost to Alabama. They didn't get it done. Right. They were good enough with their second quarterback to go to Clemson and have a chance to take it to overtime.
Number 2 quarterback, number 2 running back, number 2 tight end.
Absolutely. So this this narrative that Notre Dame doesn't have enough talent, hasn't had enough talent. Stop.
Right.
Stop. Notre Dame has the talent. They're increasing the talent in recruiting. Now it's all about them making the plays in the moments. If they make the plays in the moments in the Fiesta Bowl, they come away with the win. Point blank. It's not like they didn't have the opportunity. They had the opportunity. Now, with this schedule, they have 3 big opportunities to show that they've taken that next step and matured as a program and as a team to not only compete, which they've done. You can't come into this Ohio State game saying they haven't competed in big games. They've shown they can compete in big games. Can they get over the hump and make the necessary plays to come away with the victory? That's the next step in the maturation of this program and this football team. They get a chance to show it. They believe, Brian. These players believe that they have everything they need to do it.
And that's what the 15 team believed. You know that.
Yeah.
That's what the 17 team believed.
Yeah.
This is something Marcus Freeman had a really interesting comment today, and I want to segue to the second topic here in a second. But Marcus Freeman had a comment today where he talked about, they asked him about captains. And sometimes I just think coaches are like, why do you guys keep focusing on this? When I have captains, I'm going to name flipping captains. Like, you'll need to keep – it's not like it was on his mind. It's like, oh, shoot, that's what I was supposed to do today. Dang it. So here's who our captains are. You know, it's like you could just kind of – you saw – because I know you're watching. You saw his face reaction like, okay.
He needs to get better at hiding his thoughts.
Yes. This is why I would not like to be in his shoes, because I do not hide my emotions at all. I don't wear them on my sleeve. I wear them as a big giant print on the front of my shirt. But he made a comment like, look, if we don't like have guys that are going to be here, it's going to be a long year, right? Like, you can tell he knows he's got confidence in this team from a leadership standpoint. I think that's a big part of this too. Those guys are going to have to step up. Guys are going to have to step up. And step up means some guys are going to have to play better. Some guys are going to have to step into roles they weren't necessarily going to have, next man in kind of thing. And we're going to find out if this team has the capability of doing that. And I'll say this is one of those things where, Sean, this is either going to make this team better or it's, it's going to be something that keeps them from being as good as they could have been. It's going to be one or the other. It's not just going to be business as usual. This is and that's the thing about situations like this. What kind of galvanizing effect does it have? We've always talked about how, if Malik would have stayed healthy in 2015, I believe they go and play for a championship that year. I truly believe that. But then there's always the counter argument, since we don't really know. But what if that team never developed sort of the edge that they did, that they had to do once they had all those injuries? It had to galvanize them. I'll say, well, they didn't look like they needed it against Texas. But you get the point that I'm making, right? Like, or was it that team might have been worse if they didn't play with that edge after Malik and Torian and Durham went down and Jerron and Crawford went down. So there's always these different types of ways to look at it. But like, these things have a tendency to either bring out your character. Well, it's going to define your character as a football team one way or the other. It's going to enhance that character one way or the other. What I mean by that, Sean, is if your character is strong and unified and confident, it's going to enhance it, which makes you better. If your character is not that, it's going to enhance it and make it worse. Is kind of where I'm coming from on that. So that's kind of where I'm going to be. And again, this is just the timing of it sucks for Avery, but it's just like I kept thinking today, like, oh, I'm so happy that Harry Eastand's the O-line coach and Chancey Stuckey's the receivers coach, and then Marcus Freeman's the head coach, because I'm so much more confident in this team being able to handle that than I maybe would have been if there were some of the same coaches back in this football team. So, Sean, let's go to the third topic, but I just want to give people a little bit of a heads up. Don't leave until the end of the show, because we're going to have a special announcement coming up at the end of the show involving Sean and some of our future plans at Irish Breakdown and different things that we're doing. So don't want to leave before we do that. Sean, let's move on to what our original team topic was going to be. So Marcus Freeman on the first day of fall camp, and I want to pull up the article here, but he made a comment. So, like, first day of fall camp, Notre Dame is kind of going through the process of, typical first camp stuff. And we talked about it in our show, right? There's just certain things that kind of happen on the first day of fall camp. And we know it. And it's look, guys are going to tap out in first day of fall camp. We've mentioned the former All-Americans that tapped out the first day of fall camp. And we sort of made excuses for it. Not excuses for it, but it's like, guys, this isn't abnormal. This is a normal thing. That was what we said. Marcus Freeman said something completely different. And he said this first thing he said, he goes, there's a couple guys that couldn't finish practice. We have to get to a position where our guys aren't being pulled from practice, so we have to condition our body. He went on to say, the beautiful thing about it is I've been around different places where you really start slow and then you build up, and then the second and third week is the hardest, longest practices. The thing about it now is we're starting at ground zero. Long practices, tough, hard practices, because we have got to develop fast. We've got to be ready to roll right out of the gate. And he went on to say it's got to be hard. It's not changing. You're not changing what we're doing, and it's got to be hard. Yeah. We had a couple guys that couldn't finish practice today, and it's their job to make sure they're available for practice. It's the trainer's job to make sure they protect the player. I was literally pumping my fists when he made that comment. Because what's the biggest one of the three biggest complaints I ever made about Brian Kelly during his tenure was I'm sick of the excuses. Marcus Freeman had a legitimate, valid opportunity to say, hey, guys, nothing to worry about. This is normal first day of fall camp, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he would have been correct, but he didn't. He not only did he not accept it, he rejected it and said, hey, fellas, it ain't changing. Yeah. We aren't backing down. I absolutely loved it.
Man, you have to love it. And that's another question where he failed to not wear his emotions on his sleeve with his response, with the little exhale of the breath and kind of look, that's the way it is. We're not changing. And I think the fact that the two guys that ended up not being able to finish, I think it sent a message. I think he took the opportunity to send the message to his team and to the media. Like, this is the new norm. Like, did you not hear me after the Fiesta Bowl when I said, okay, that's done. What was the past is no more. We're moving forward. If you didn't hear it then, let me reiterate it to you now. This is the new norm. And I'm sure you've talked to Sean, you talked to Vince, myself, we've shared with you. There is not one wasted, whether it's drills, getting to the next thing, when the horn goes off, whatever, it's all about fast pace. Run. Go into the next drill. When you get there, take your rep, move to the next position. Al Washington, who spoke with the media, I was sitting here and I was like, yo, I'm used to seeing Notre Dame do defensive line drills where you make a move, you get around your defender, and you go stay in line or stand in line or wait for your next rep. He had garbage cans lined up the width of the football field. It was like, get in the stands, make your move, go to the next garbage can, get down in your stands, make your move. It's like, no, there is no resting. We're going to play with energy. We're going to play fast. We're going to play with a different pace. And this is going to make an impact during the game when you play this way and you have this mentality, and you have to be happy with how that impact from that statement on August 5th and how you're seeing it on the practice field. It's like, you have to respect it. The players have to respect it, and they have to elevate themselves, not just what they do on the field and how they take care of themselves off the field. They have to take that responsibility. I have to make sure I'm ready for tomorrow. I need to go tell the trainer, hey, I have this little thing right here in my leg. I don't know what it is, but I need to make sure that I'm straight for tomorrow. Like, put the trainers to work. Make them earn their money. Like, everybody under the umbrella needs to play and needs to operate with the urgency, because that's what it is.
Yes.
He's making his team understand there's an urgency to being a championship team.
Yes.
There's an urgency to that. And he's trying to instill that urgency in his team.
Yep. So, Sean, I want to you made that comment, but I think it can't just be the head coach. It has to be instilled top down. And there's an article on the front page of Irish Breakdown today about Jarrett Patterson. And here's a comment that he made talking about Harry Easton. And he said it's like games like speed. The biggest part about with Coach Eastand's individual periods is the guy on defense has to be going full speed to get the proper look. You want to simulate game-like conditions. You know, guys playing low and working double teams. Usually every play averages around 5 seconds. So an individual now, we're working 5-second combo blocks, drive blocks, things of that nature. We're just kind of building that game conditioning so when it comes to game time, you're in that proper condition and ready to go. And then he said more about it doesn't matter if it's a 1-yard run or a 99-yard touchdown. If something's not right, technique-wise, you're going to know about it. That's what it's all about. That's something that other guys are understanding as we go on, that it's all about fundamentals and technique. And it's just one of those things where that point right there, what have I always said? The biggest problem that Brian Kelly had, in my opinion, when it came like big picture was I guess this is another one of the three, is he was always so results driven. Well, it's a 99-yard touchdown. It's all good. Harry, he says, I don't give a crap if it's a 99-yard touchdown in practice, right? You do this again. This is the way it needs to be done. This is the expectation.
Yeah.
And I think those are the things you look at and say, there's such a greater level of accountability now. That's the biggest thing about, we go back to the toughness. Like there's a mental toughness that needs to be demanded. There's a physical toughness that needs to be demanded. You know, how many comments have we heard about Marcus Freeman talking about the O-line and the D-line and all those type of things? You know, it's one of those things where they're trying to change the culture, and these are the things that do it, right? And it's so welcomed, but there's an accountability to it. That's a 5th-year senior captain that's talking about, like, he kind of smiles like, hey, it's never good enough with him.
Yeah.
And that's where you want to be. And I think that's why I think Marcus Freeman likes being around Coach Easton so much, is for that exact same reason. You know, and I think that's that changing culture that we've talked about, Sean, that they're going to need if this program is going to take that next step. Because you and I have talked about this before.
Mm-hmm.
Notre Dame was never mentally ready in those big games that they played, for the most part. There's a couple times, but more often than not, they just weren't mentally ready to play, and they weren't physical enough in those big games. And I think those are the two things that Marcus Freeman is working really hard to try to change. And he said it right now. He's like, there's no let up. There's no let up. If I let up now because it's hard, I'm setting that precedent that if it's hard and you guys can't handle it, we'll back off. You know, the trainers will decide who can or can't play. If you're cleared to play, then you better be flipping out here answering the bell.
Right.
And that's the key.
Look, everything you just said is spot on. The urgency that goes down to Harry Heastand, what you're talking about. We joked watching highlights the other day that, man, we actually get to watch. I feel like I need to pay an extra 99 cents a week, you know, to NBC, because I'm going to be watching an offensive line actually get to the second level this season. Like, wait a minute.
That's exactly what you tweeted me yesterday when you watched the O-line video practice. He's like, yo, it is so nice to see an offensive line actually getting to the second level.
I feel like I'm getting the premium package at Notre Dame football now.
Yes.
I got an upgrade.
Yes.
So,
yes.
You know, those are things to be excited about. They're not just the urgency, the fast pace, you know, the responsibility and accountability for the players, but the nuance and the attention to detail. And even you talking about how there were messages about how guys were taking care of the locker room, you know, when Marcus Freeman walked in, and how things need to be changed with the coaching staff, and how often they met, and how things were done. Everything was just tightened up. You know, it's like, if you're going to put these shoes on and they're going to have laces, don't have the laces loose. Let's tighten up. Tie this thing up and make sure that we're running a ship that is a championship contender ship and a championship contender program. And ultimately, that's what you're seeing from each and every coach. I was impressed with Harry Heastand. I was impressed with Al Washington and what he talked about. And, you know, when you have a coach that comes before you and he's talking about the 4th or the 5th defensive tackle, you know what I'm saying, the rotation, and he's talking about the effort he's getting from him, then you start to feel like, okay, yeah, like there's something going on. There's a synergy going on in this team where everyone has taken ownership. Like, this is not just a top-heavy team. Yeah, you have guys on both sides of the ball that are dudes that are expected to be stars, but everyone on this roster seems to have taken ownership of winning football games.
Yeah.
And what they mean to that. And that starts at the top, just like you said, and with the statement that Marcus Freeman made. It was bigger than just, explaining why, practice ran long and why guys didn't make it through.
Right.
He was setting a clear precedent for the program with that comment and with that response.
Yeah. It's refreshing, right? Because football's a tough game, man. Football's a tough game.
Yeah.
And it's a mentally tough game. It's a physically tough game.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to be ready to handle both at a high level. And because you're going to have adversity. You're not. Georgia had some devastating injuries last year. And you know what? They stepped up and overcame them.
Yeah.
Alabama had some devastating injuries last year. And you know what? They couldn't. And that's why Georgia is raising a championship banner right now, and Alabama's not. Right. Well, Alabama, and I've said this many times. Well, if Alabama would have had such and such and such and such, well, the answer, I'm sure Georgia's like, well, we sure would have loved to have had 100%, George Pickens, which they didn't have. I mean, he ended up coming back at the end of the year, but he wasn't 100%. We sure would have loved to have had a healthy Eric Gilbert. We still would have loved to have a healthy, Darnell Washington. I'm sure they would have loved to have had all those things, but I mean, George Pickens caught 5 passes last year. He was their dude coming into the season, and that's what good teams do. But what has Kirby done? I mean, as much as I kind of feel like, Kirby's overrated in some areas, the one thing I've never questioned about his football teams are they physically tough. And
man.
What they've done a better job of in the last year or two is they're gotten mentally tougher.
Yeah.
They don't fold in those big moments like they did early in his tenure.
Yes.
And I think that's something we saw last year. And I think the big reason that happened last year is because of all the injuries they had early there. Hey, look, guys, what are we going to do? We just going to say, hey, you know what? This isn't our year. Or are we going to step up and say, hey, next man up? And not only does that guy, because here's the thing about next man up, right? It's not just about that guy stepping in the lineup, but it's like, hey, man, Lorenzo, now you got to be, we can't wait for you to break out. You got to do this now, my man. Yeah. Hey, Braden, it's now or never, baby. Like, we need you to step up and be that guy. We know you can be that you've been working all offseason to be. Hey, Tobias, you said you wanted to play. Here's your chance. Dion, you want to be that guy? No more of this stuff, man. It's time to put the big boy pants on and go out there and show the world what you can do, right? Yeah. JT, you want to show everybody what you can do? Now's your chance, right? Tyree, this is your time, man. You don't like how people have been critical of you this offseason? I'm not saying he's been that way. I'm just, just kind of going on my little tangent here. Hey, man, now's your time to step up and show the world what you're capable of.
Absolutely.
Tyler, this is what you've been working for. This is your offense now. No excuses, right? Go get her done. And I think that's the thing it's key. It's not just who replaces Avery. Now everybody's got to elevate their game.
Yeah.
And that's the key, because that's the only way you overcome this. If you don't overcome it that way, then you're just not going to be successful. But that's why it's so important that even before these injuries happened, Marcus Freeman set a standard of no more excuses, folks. None. And that's why it's key, because now you're better prepared to handle it today. Now that you've had this bad news, you're prepared to handle it because he's been setting this agenda. And here's the thing, guys. He didn't say that on the August 5th practice, and that's the first time that they heard it. Oh, wow. Coach isn't going to give us a break. He's not going to back off of us. They've known this since what day did they report in January?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's why it's so important to set that standard.
Yeah.
And that's the refreshing change. Now, will it manifest itself into wins and losses? We don't know. We'll find out. But it definitely wouldn't have manifested into wins if it wasn't being established. Like, this gives you that puncher's chance to, hey, look, we're still going to be all right. Now we got to go out and make plays.
Look, correct me if I'm wrong. This program has proven over the last 5 years that it's a 10-win program.
Yep.
This offense has proven no matter who the quarterback is over the last 5 years, it is a mid-30s per game offense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
34.2, 31.4, which that was a little bit misleading for different reasons. 36.8 33.4, 35.2.
Right.
And the 33.4 came in a year where they had no FCS opponents.
Right.
I mean, excuse me, like they had like one non-Power 5 opponent, like South Florida, who they hung, 52 on, but they would have had another MAC team on their schedule. That was the COVID year.
Yeah.
Where it was like all ACC teams, Bama, and then South Florida.
Yeah.
So, yes, you are correct.
So, look,
Sean, yes.
That's
the floor.
The program is what it is. Now we wait to see what it can become.
Right.
The talent in the program and the locker room and the players, what they've established is like, this is what Notre Dame is. Is it good enough? No, because we won national championships, right?
Correct.
Okay. So now we get to see this coaching staff and Marcus Freeman at the helm, how they elevated to get to the next level. It's like, we already know all this gloom. Dude, Notre Dame being, what is the win totals now? 8.5 or something crazy like that? Like, what? Are you not paying it?
Hammer it.
It's like, are you not paying attention to this program? Like, it's crazy. It's crazy. And people, I saw your epic thank you rant on Twitter last night. What are you talking about? We don't know who our quarterback is.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
He brought that violence on himself, Sean. He brought that violence on himself yesterday. I'm sorry.
Come on. Look, Notre Dame, we are who we are. You can argue and debate that we're a top 5 program in college football. If you want to say we're 6th, fine.
Yeah.
But you can't go any lower than that.
No.
You can't.
Let me ask you this, Sean. You talked about last year's offense, 35 points a game, Notre Dame went 11-2 and all those kind of things, right? Right now, today, of what you know is going to be back in Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Compared to yesterday or last year with what you knew Notre Dame was.
Yeah.
Was Notre Dame a more talented team today with all the injuries than they were a year ago at this time?
More talented?
Yes, on offense. I don't think it's really debatable. I think you're thinking I'm tricking you.
I would say, look, you know me, we've said this. I just had to think about it for a second. I would have loved for certain people in that wide receiver room to come back. Because I feel like if certain people had come back in the wide receiver room, I'm like, we're talking about a totally different thing as far as the offense. But the talent.
To the point, because it also factors in the coaching staff too, Sean.
Right.
And that's my thing is, does Notre Dame have less talent today than they had a year ago? I would say no.
Yeah.
I think their offensive line is more talented.
Yeah.
Their tight end core is not going to be less talented.
Yeah.
Michael Mayer is going to be a junior, right? The receiving core to me does not have a Kevin Austin, but let's be honest, Kevin Austin was pretty terrible in some big games last year. But you now have Lorenzo Styles as a year older. Braden Lindsey's healthier. You have Tobias Merriweather.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Jaden Thomas is healthy and back. Your running back room is healthier. Audric and Logan Diggs are now older. I think that's the position you can maybe argue was better last year, although I would say with Chris Tyree's injuries. And then I think a quarterback, they're more talented, significantly more so.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can say that they're less talented. And my point is what we would all agree on is that they are going to be way better coached. And so that's, again, now, but I'll reel it back. They can't afford to have more happen, really. They can't sustain another big injury. But I think this is the whole point. It was never, to your point, Sean, it was never about talent.
No.
They never had the mindset. How many, you've had people, you've interviewed people, Sean, where they've said, we were just never mentally ready for big games.
Yes.
And from what I know, from the conversations I've had with people around the program, the current head coach was very well aware of that last year and knows it has to be addressed and fixed, and it will be addressed and fixed. Because here's the thing, the offensive linemen aren't going to be tight in big games because they're always getting yelled at. You know what I mean? It's like it's nothing new for them. But the head coach has got to be that way, the coordinators and all that. And I think that's the big thing is that's where that mental toughness aspect comes from. And Marcus Freeman is demanding confidence from his players too. And you talk to people about this. He demands that they believe in themselves. He demands that they have confidence in themselves, because that confidence is that final piece, Sean, where I don't give a crap if we're playing in Columbus.
Yeah.
We're Notre Dame. I don't care if we're going down to Tuscaloosa. Now, it may not be a matchup that's in their favor. That's not the point.
Yeah.
Right? That's not to say that Notre Dame has a roster that can go into any stadium and beat them all by 40. Not the point.
No.
The point is that football is a mental game as much as it is physical. And I would argue in some ways more so. And I'm not even talking about just the got to know the system and the plays and the technique. I'm talking about just look, Sean, you know this. You're from Chicago, from Norfolk, Virginia. You and I have known some big dudes who did a lot of this.
Right.
The first time they got punched in the mouth,
they got knocked out.
they didn't like it. They didn't like it. Like, got all the muscles for no reason whatsoever, right? And then there's that little dude. It's like, I ain't fighting that guy. Well, man, you're bigger than he is. Yeah, but I got to kill him to win, because he ain't going to stop fighting.
Right.
It's a mindset thing. And it doesn't matter how big and bad you are. It's a mindset. And what Coach Freeman is trying to establish is a mindset of we will fight. We talk about a lot of history on the show, right? And Sean, you know this. Like one of the things that I love talking about, and I'm going to try to find it here, is kind of World War II. And there was a speech that the Prime Minister of Britain, Great Britain at the time, Winston Churchill gave, and he gave it over the radio. And I'm going to try to find. I'm going to try to find it here and read the quote from it. But I'm going to I want to find this part right here where he's talking about basically at the time Britain was basically alone. The rest of Europe had pretty much been defeated or was neutral. The United States had vowed that they were going to stay out of the war. Now they were given supplies and trying to help that way, but it was like this little tiny country of England against Nazi Germany, right? Who at the time was perceived as this unbeatable force. And Britain never folded, and that ended up winning. But this is the thing he said. He talks about this. He goes, "We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And even if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it were subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until in God's good time, the new world with all its power and might steps forth to the rescue and the liberation of the old." And it was just one of those things where I don't care how dark this day gets. I don't care who we're playing. I don't care if it's Columbus. I don't care if it's Tuscaloosa. I don't care if it's the Coliseum. I don't care if it's Clemson, South Carolina, Norman, Oklahoma, this bowl game, that bowl game. This Notre Dame team will fight you until we have no fight left. And that's what Marcus Freeman is trying to establish. And he's been doing it since he got hired. And that is the reason more than any other that Sean and I have sat here with great confidence in saying, this is why this team is different. This is why it's not same old Notre Dame. Will it manifest itself in Saturdays? We'll find out. But that right there, that toughness, that fight, that I don't care what happens, we are Notre Dame, that confidence that we are Notre Dame, Sean, is what I believe is ultimately going to be the difference. The recruiting and all that's great and all that, but you can recruit best teams in the country, but if you don't have that spirit, Sean, then you're just never going to be there.
Yeah.
And that's what has me so excited about this team. And that's at the heart of what we believe was behind Marcus Freeman's comments just that day, but it manifests itself in so many different ways of how he's running this program.
And you have to love it. That's the type of guy I would want to play for.
Yep.
That's the type of guy I would want to play for. And you understand why everything has come to fruition. And what I mean about it's a lot of things that we don't say on our podcast that hits the cutting room floor per se. Because we actually, respect our relationships and sources and things that are told to us. Look, there was somewhat of an exodus expected after the Fiesta Bowl. whether it's via the NFL or whether it was via the transfer portal. There was a total 180 from the feeling that most of us around the program had to what actually happened. And it's because of Marcus Freeman.
Right.
Guys just flat out, they already love the school.
Yeah.
They already love their brothers.
Some of them already have degrees.
Yeah, but like you know how it is. Like you love something, you enjoy it, and then all of a sudden something else is infused into the situation, and you're like, yo, this is even more fun now. Like, I think I'll stay for a while.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing. And then it parlayed into the spring. It parlayed into, the excitement we saw. We parlayed into how things were changed at the pro day, and things were changed, like the interaction with the coaching staff at the pro day. And the staff that was there wasn't the staff that the players had played for.
Right.
And they already had a relationship with the outgoing guys.
Right.
And it's like, wow. Then you get to the spring practice and you see how everything's upbeat, but it's, limited access. And then you get to the first practice and it's like, oh, this is different.
Yeah.
There's a new energy. There's a new expectation. Everything has been elevated. And you start to realize, okay, we haven't seen what we all want at the end of the rainbow, which is that national championship. But I get a funny feeling this is how it starts. And I'll point this out. The same urgency is the same urgency that Lou Holtz implemented when he got to Notre Dame. It's the exact same urgency. Maybe not done with the same methods, but the same feeling. Like, no, things are changing. You're going to do it my way. And I don't care what people have been used to. I don't care what anybody reports. Hey, when I walk in, I'm your head coach. Put your feet down, sit up, listen, take notes. Things have changed. It's the same urgency. Different situations, different methods, same urgency. Guess what? His other mentor, Jim Tressel, did the same thing, following a football coach that had plenty of talent at Ohio State, but Ohio State could never get to the next level. Jim Tressel came in and did the exact same thing. Marcus Freeman's pedigree, coming from Jim Tressel and his Notre Dame mentor, Lou Holtz, he's implementing the same vibe and same feeling.
Yep.
And just like those two guys did, eventually we hope that Marcus Freeman brings the next national championship to Notre Dame. But you have to feel like, okay, this is what it felt like when Tressel took over. This is what it felt like when Lou Holtz took over. And honestly, I'm not saying it's going to be the same final score.
Sure.
But the vibe around this Ohio State Notre Dame game has a very similar vibe from the national aspect that Miami Ohio State national championship game had. No, Ohio State doesn't have the athletes. They don't have a quarterback. Miami's going to run all over them. Miami has all of these wide receivers. Who are they going to use to defend them? Like all of this stuff that was said about that game and how much Miami was better and more talented and faster, and they were just a juggernaut, couldn't be stopped. They were going to win back-to-back national championships. Okay. I hear you. Unfortunately, Miami had to walk on that field and play the game. And like you said, they got punched in the mouth. And I'll tip my cap to Miami. They responded. After losing Willis McGahee, after getting down early, they responded, climbed back in the game. But ultimately, Ohio State won the game. Notre Dame, in my honest opinion, is going to have – Notre Dame is going to compete. That's the last thing I'm worried about. Whether or not they'll show up and compete, I'm not worried about that. They might turn the ball over, and Ohio State might take advantage of that. And that might be an effect on the scoreboard that they might not be able to overcome, but that's football. But it won't be for the sake of not competing. Notre Dame is going to compete. They're going to show up. And now we'll see which side makes the big plays in the big moments.
Yep.
It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. Like, you can have Ohio State fans jump in the chat, say what they want to say. Boomer, whatever his name on Twitter, come and talk about whatever he wants to talk about, which is with a lack of knowledge. At the end of the day, I'm going to say it now, Brian. Hot take. It's going to be an early candidate for Game of the Year.
You got me fired up.
I think the game is going to be that good. It's going to be an early candidate for Game of the Year. And you might end up with a rematch in the college football playoff.
I got something for you right here, Sean. Okay, you're gonna be happy, but also mad at me all at the same time because you may just kind of go break something. Okay.
All
right. Let's get this in here because I gotta play this. Let me know if you can hear this, Sean.
In the football game, we want to keep our poise. Poise is just having confidence in yourself and what you're doing. We are not going to mouth off, push, or shove ever at Notre Dame. We're going to wait till that ball snap. We're going to put a Riddell on somebody, and we're going to be the most physical football game in the country until the whistle blows. We want to win for one thing. The first meeting we ever had, we said we were going to bring respect. Don't talk about it. Only one way you get respect, and that's by looking somebody in the eye for 60 minutes. Go out there, hitch up your trousers, and say, "Hey, baby, here I am now. Let me see you run through me now. Let me see you show some disrespect for me when I'm nose on your nose. Let me see what you think of me now that my face is to you." Talk about respect. We're talking about respect around the country. The game of who's going to flinch first. Who's going to give up first. We know that is going to be Notre Dame. Notre Dame football is nothing more than toughness, togetherness, intensity, intelligence, and competitiveness. All through Notre Dame fight song. The finest fight song in the world. Man, there's nothing like it. It's world famous. Most popular love song. You ever listen to the words? Third Doctor says, "Rally, you sons of Notre Dame." All the fight song talks about is overcoming odds. What though the odds be great or small, Notre Dame will win overall. It talks about bounce back from adversity, and that's what Notre Dame is. And it talks about a love and a loyalty to this university. That's what makes it a great song. It's got a great rhythm, but it's a loyalty, the love of Notre Dame. But it's overcoming the odds, and everybody in this country faces odds. Nobody maybe has ever faced a bigger odds than this football team faced on December the 2nd when we met. That's what Notre Dame's about. Love of the university. This got decided to go.
So, yeah.
Look,
there you go.
Let me tell you something. Look, I try to be responsible as a media member, Brian. Right? And there's no way I would never sit with the media during this Ohio State game. I can't.
No.
I can't.
That's why you and I have never had a conversation about you getting credentialed for that game.
No. I don't know. There's no way, because I'm not going to be respectful either way. I have too much respect for the profession and the guys that do it. So yeah, I'm going to have to be in the mix. And I'm tired of, man. I'm just tired of talking, man.
Mm-hmm.
I'm tired of talking, and that's the blessing of it. For the first time, we actually get to report, because you can talk about this. I'm a newbie. I'm a newbie, and I'm going to throw this alley-oop to you. I'm a newbie, Brian, right? So when I go to practice, Harry Heastand affects me.
Yeah.
See, all the veterans like Vince and everybody else that have been
No, dude, trust me, Vince is the same way.
He's
First
the
thing
same
he
way?
texted me at the first practice was like, yo, Harry's in midseason form. Like, he loves it.
Right?
He loves it.
Because, we're watching the quarterbacks like, Brian gave us clear instructions when we went to the first practice. Clear instructions. Like, we knew what the focus of the first practice was. So we had clear instructions. And we're there and we're trying to focus on our first responsibility, but you just can't help but to hear Harry Heastand. Like, from across the field. Like, you're focused here and all you hear over everyone else. Because it's not like other coaches aren't coaching. That's all you hear is Harry Heastand. And the newbie that I am, I turn from my responsibility and I fixate on Harry Heastand. Right. And I'm like, oh, man. And I say that to say this and to throw this oop to you. How much better is it or has it been for you to cover a program that is far more honest from coaching, head coach, staff, just far more honest and transparent about what is and not giving excuses. You talked about it being a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
It has to make guys like you that have been on the beat, Tim Priester, all of those guys that have been around, it has to make you guys.
Don't put me in the same breath as Tim and Lou, because I'm not.
Oh, no, those guys.
Those are the legends. Right?
Absolutely.
Because they lived it, Sean. And
right.
To answer your question, here's the reality of it. Like, you and I grew up in the same Notre Dame era.
Yeah.
Right. And part of our frustration has been, it's not that Notre Dame loses, it's the way they lose. And I'm not talking about the scoreboard. I'm talking about the fact that Notre Dame went into the Cotton Bowl 2 years ago and basically said, hey, let's make sure we don't get blown out. The fact that Notre Dame's often not the – Notre Dame has played a lot of games the last 3-4 years where they are clearly the most talented team on the field.
Oh, man.
They have not had nearly as many games where they were the toughest team on the field or the baddest team on the field or the most confident team on the field. And to me, that's why I wanted to play that video, because it when we talk about Marcus Freeman, you're talking about, a 36-year-old, just completely different generation, tall, former linebacker, athletic, still looks like he can play. And then you've got this little tiny, 5'6", guy with a lisp and thick glasses, and they could not be from different generations, different worlds, different universes, but they have the same heartbeat.
Yeah. And
that's why Marcus Freeman and Lou Holtz have connected so much since he was hired as a head coach, because, like you said, Jim Tressel had a similar heartbeat, right? And it's about football, still a game of toughness, physical and mental toughness. And this is the difference, right? You just said this exactly. Don't talk about it. This is exactly how Lou Holtz quote goes. Don't talk about it. There's only one way you get respect, and that's by looking someone in the eye for 60 minutes. Go out there, hitch up your trousers, and say, hey, baby, here I am now. Let me see you run through me now. Let me see you show some disrespect for me now when I'm nose on your nose. Let me see what you think of me now that my face is to you. We talk about respect. We talk about respect around the country. It's a game of who's going to flinch first, who's going to give up first. We know that isn't going to be Notre Dame. That's what I grew up on. That's what championship teams are. Even today, that's what Alabama is. That's what Alabama is. Alabama earns respect because you're going to be for a physical fight for 60 minutes. How has Kirby been able to overcome Alabama last year? Because of that right there. They were going to fight you. Hey, look, if on the beaches, on the whatever, we're going to fight you wherever we are.
Yeah.
Lou Holtz's thing that he said before the Miami game, hey, we're going to go out there and play football. If they want to fight, we're going to fight them afterwards in the street. But we're going to go play a football game. But then what does he say next? Save Jimmy Johnson's ass for me. Right? And to me, it's that spirit that has been missing for a long time. And this isn't Brian Kelly's fault. This has been since everyone before him, since Lou. And honestly, even kind of at the end of Coach Holtz's tenure, because of all the sickness and the health and all the issues that he was having, his wife was having, and all that kind of stuff. That's what's been missing at Notre Dame. It's talk about respect around the country. Notre Dame's not respected around the country. Why? Because with the exception of certain units on the team, this is not a team people are afraid to go toe-to-toe with.
No.
This is not a team that people are afraid to. And that's what made the 2012 team so unique. That was the one team at Notre Dame you could look at and say, hey, they're going to battle for 60 minutes. They may not be the most talented. I mean, they're not even top 3 in most talented teams that Brian Kelly's had. Not even in top 3.
You know what? With you saying that, wow. Because they're probably like one of my top 3 favorite.
Sure, but not top 3 most talented of Brian Kelly's tenure.
Yeah.
I mean, 2011 team was more talented than that team, Sean.
2011 and that run from like 2014 to through 2017 was.
2018 was more talented. 2017 was more talented. 2011 was more talented. We said 15 already.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not even top 3 talent wise, but they got everything out of what they had and more. Why? Because that was the one team that had that fight, and it was more of a leadership on the team thing. It was more about Manti and Cap and Zach Martin and Tyler Eifert and those kind of guys than it was about the head coach. And to me, that's what makes this different. I've talked to several Notre Dame players who have said, what you saw was about us. We did that in spite of what we were, and now it's kind of like, it can't just be Harry, Sean. It can't just be Harry. Like, and I loved what you were saying and all that, but it can't just be Harry. The thing that makes this different is that Al Washington challenges his unit to match the intensity that Harry's unit brings. Right. And Tommy Rees is a competitive dude.
Yeah.
And Mike Mickens is a competitive dude. He doesn't show it, but trust me,
Super
deep down, that's a competitive dude, right? Al Golden is a competitive dude.
Yes.
D'La McCullough is a competitive dude. Like all that. But at the end of the day, the guy at the top is that kind of guy as well. And that's why we this all matters, because it's one of those things where if you don't instill that toughness, we're going to circle back to the beginning as we end. And we transition to our final segment. It's that right there, Sean. It's you have to instill that we're never going to flinch. We're never going to back down. Hey, you want to run your mouth all summer? That's cool. Let's see if you run your mouth now that I'm face to face with you. Let me see you run your mouth now that we're nose to nose, right? And the fact is that's not what teams were afraid of or thought about when they played Notre Dame in the past. There were some years with the offensive line was that way.
Yeah.
But not everybody else.
Not everybody else.
And that's why that first day that, hey, this is going to be hard and it's going to get harder and we're not backing off.
Yeah.
Right. That's why that matters, because it's instilling that mindset. And it's a mindset about Notre Dame. And I think that's the difference. Marcus Freeman has embraced that this isn't just about the way to win football games. This is the way that Notre Dame is supposed to win football games. It's not about X's and O's and scheme. You can be a pass team that throws the ball a decent amount and still be a mentally and physically tough football team.
Yeah.
And if Tommy Rees wanted to be a passive, throw it 68 times a game guy, he ain't bringing Harry Heastand back and hiring D'La McCullough. I can promise you that.
Facts.
And that's what makes you excited about why I just don't buy the whole, we should be worried about this, and this, because they don't have this, and this. Yeah. This team is going to be different. The talent's always been there. This team is going to have the mental fortitude, I believe, to take that jump. Will it be this year? I don't know. Will it be next year? It's going to happen. And just the more and more I hear about where this program is and what they do on a day-to-day basis, you can't help but be fired up about it. And that's why, we have a different attitude than we had before, because we're finally getting what we've been begging for years.
Yeah.
Embrace what makes Notre Dame special. And then do everything you can to build around what makes it special.
Yeah.
And that right there is at the heart of it. What's the freaking nickname?
Yeah.
It's Notre Dame, what? Fighting Irish. And that's what I love.
Yeah.
So, Sean, let's move into our final topic. We're now going to go off of Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And we're going to wrap up sort of with our college football aspect. Somebody asked what RTCF stands for, Recruiting Team College Football. Recruiting, we kind of went a different direction today because there was so much news. We talked about the team with the recent subject. Now we're going to have a big college football topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And today, Sean, we are going to make our predictions for the SEC.
the conference that got us more money in our TV deal. We appreciate all the
Yes.
money the SEC is getting. Thank you. Thank you. You're changing the market. We appreciate you.
So let's make our predictions. Actually, you know what, Sean? Do you want to do the special announcement now, or do you want to do that after, since we're kind of getting to talk
We can do
about
it now.
Okay.
We
So
do it now because it kind of parlays
Yeah.
into what we're going to be covering.
So we have a special announcement at Irish Breakdown, and I've alluded a little bit to this previously this week, but we have launched the new college football, the CFB Nation channel, which is part of Driscoll Publishing, kind of part of the Irish Breakdown family. It is a channel that we are going to talk college football, and I will be on it at times, but we're hiring hosts to kind of start new shows. We've signed a contract with John Garcia Jr. of SIL American. He's going to host a weekly recruiting show. I have another writer who's a college football writer for one of the major publications who we're kind of verbally agreed, but we've got some things to iron out. And then I've also made another hire that I'm very excited about to do a daily college football show that will take on different topics. And it is Sean Davis. So Sean Davis is going to launch a show on the CFB Nation channel. If you have not subscribed to it, you need to do that now. I will put the link down in the bottom here in a little bit. But Sean is going to do a daily show Monday to Friday, and it's going to be called Down a Distance. And he's going to have different topics, different days. He's going to have some special guests on. He's going to have a Big Ten day. He's going to have sort of a preview in the season. We're going to do all types of fun things. And it's going to be more college football related, because what we want to do is we want to be able to provide the same honest analysis, no politics, no fluff, no spin, no clickbait type of analysis to all the other aspects of college football, not just Notre Dame. So one thing to keep in mind, this is not going to impact our Notre Dame coverage. I am still Irish Breakdown. I am still going to talk Notre Dame and have our Notre Dame shows. This is not taking anything away from what we're doing with Irish Breakdown or with Notre Dame. This is simply adding on to our coverage package, right? And so and that's why we, instead of adding this to our Irish Breakdown sort of universe and kind of having these, like an aspect of Irish Breakdown that maybe wasn't, that was, hey, this is college football related, but it's on the Irish Breakdown platform. We really felt it was important to have just something different. So we launched CFB Nation, and I'm going to put the link below. So we would really, really appreciate all of you subscribing to this to help us get down to 1,000. And we're about 948 subscribers right now. We need to get to 1,000 to start to begin the monetization process. But Sean's once we get rolling, his is going to be a live show, a daily live show. And so we haven't quite decided on the time. We'll figure all that out, but just go subscribe to the channel, hit the notification, and we'll let you know before the show starts. But it's going to be exciting. We're going to talk about all types of different things, and Sean and I are going to go over this weekend just to further about what he's going to do, and I want to hear the different aspects of it. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait to be on. I'm actually asking, hey man, do you want to have me on? Yeah, I'd love to come on. We have some special guests, which I'll allow Sean to announce who his special co-hosts are going to be on different days when he launches the show. That's for him to break. But I'm excited about it, Sean. I can't. I love having you part of the team, but now we get to have you part of the CFB Nation team as well, man. I'm very excited about it. Very excited about it.
Honored, blessed, and IB Nation, you guys are a part of everything that I've been able to do and elevate myself in Notre Dame and covering it for the media. And I appreciate you guys. This is just a wonderful time, a wonderful season to be connected to the program, to be connected to you guys. And I just look forward to giving you guys continued great content. We got some special things happening. So like Brian said, Down and Distance daily, Monday through Friday. And then you'll see me, on the weekends working with the staff for game days as well. Yeah. So I'm super excited about what we're doing.
We did announce that you are going to be part of the post-game show this year.
Absolutely.
So Sean and Ryan are going to be part of our post-game shows on Saturdays after Notre Dame games.
So if you have not subscribed, go subscribe today.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as the show is done, go subscribe. We need your help. Let's build it out. And once again, make an impact in Notre Dame media coverage.
Absolutely.
And college football.
That's right. So, Sean, now we're going to transition to our SEC predictions.
Mm-hmm.
This is a really fascinating year in the SEC because I still believe it's the two teams at the top. I think we both agree that it's right now we still project sort of the same two teams at the top. But I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of different movement this year. I think there's going to be some surprises. There's going to be some teams, I think, kind of ascending that have been down for recent years or maybe aren't big teams, have gone through coaching change. The SEC went through a lot of change the last couple of years.
It did.
I mean, Tennessee's got a new coach.
Yeah.
Florida's got a new coach. South Carolina's got a new coach. And I mean, the last 2 years, these have all happened. Missouri has a new coach. Vanderbilt has a new coach. Arkansas has a new coach. Mississippi State has a new coach who's going into his third year, right? LSU has a new coach. Auburn has a new coach. So you're talking about 9 coaching changes within the last 3 years. 8 of those 9 have happened in the last 2 years. So there's been a lot of change in the SEC, and I think it's going to be a real competitive year. I think that we'll kind of get into the divisions. I think that there's at the top, there's distance between one and everybody else in both divisions. It's my belief. I don't know if you believe that about Georgia or not. That's my belief.
I do.
But underneath it, there's going to be a lot of competition and battles.
Yeah.
And it reminds me a lot of like we talked about the Big Ten West a couple weeks ago, Sean, where I could see a lot of different teams kind of moving around in the different divisions. So let's start off in the East, Sean. And we both believe Georgia is still going to be that team. I think the gap between them and everybody else was so great last year. They're coming down to earth a little bit. You lost 15 guys in the NFL, right?
Yeah.
But they're still the class of the conference. That's why you recruit elite classes every year. You don't rebuild, you just reload. And I think that's what Georgia's doing in 2022.
Yeah. You talk about rebuilding or not. Look, they only have 10 starters coming back, right?
Sure.
They lose.
They only had 15 coming back last year.
Right? But, you lose guys like Jordan Davis and Trevon Walker, and you think to yourself, like, that defense might take a step back. Then you realize they still have Eric Gilbert and Brock Powers in the tight end room. They have Nolan Smith and Robert Beal, who, flirted with Notre Dame for a little bit, eventually went to Georgia, coming off the edges. Like you said, they just reload. They just reload on the fly. They lose one of the top. They lose Burton to Alabama, but they still have youngsters coming in that didn't play last year. They expect them to step up, and they always have a stable running back. So nothing's changed. Look, the one thing I love the most about this team, other than Kirby Smart and this program, is Todd Monken. And it goes back to what harken back to the point about Tommy Rees that I made about him having to comfort everything. Todd Monken is that comforting. He is the guy that when they lost guys, they lost Pickens early in the season. He was the one that said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And this is how we're going to be successful as an offense. And I feel like he's going to continue to do that. He's going to find a way for teams not to lock in on what they did last year and shut things down. I think he probably goes to a lot of 2 tight end sets, but he runs it differently. I still think they're going to use their running backs in the passing game. They're always going to be physical up front.
Yeah.
And this is something we've seen that's going to bode well for Notre Dame. When you have a rivalry or a war in fall camp between the offensive and defensive lines, you feel pretty confident about your team going into the season. And Georgia usually has that. They might not have the premier names along the offensive line, but when they come out of practice going up against that defense, they're battle tested and they're ready. And so they're head and shoulders above everyone else. From a talent standpoint, I think it's going to take Florida maybe 2 recruiting cycles to get back in the mix from a talent standpoint. Of course, they're expecting big things from their young quarterback. They're expecting him to elevate the offense, to elevate the team. That's a lot to put on his shoulders, but he is multifaceted and very talented. That's without question. Without question. Kentucky, you talk
right.
Look.
So hold on a second. Hold on a second.
What?
You're getting ahead of me there. So Georgia's 1.
Yeah.
So Tennessee's 2 in your
Tennessee
view, right?
2. We both agree on that.
Correct. And Hendon Hooker, obviously, who you were just talking about, is a big reason for it.
Mm-hmm.
I also think they have a lot coming back on defense. And I think that was like last year, the focus was on fixing the offense. And they did that in a lot of different ways. And they battled some injuries at receiver late in the year, but I think it's going to benefit them. They have a lot of linemen coming back. Hendon Hooker's back. They've recruited well. I think this year's got to be about fixing the defense. And I think that's ultimately going to be the test for Tennessee. And Sean, we're going to kind of have and we'll talk about them as those teams come up, sort of who is that team that could surprise everybody this year? And then who's that team that's going to disappoint everybody this year?
Yeah.
Tennessee's the team that could surprise me. Because I'll say this, if Georgia kind of goes through what they went through last year, I don't think they're as built as well to sustain the kind of injuries they had last year because of how much they lost. Like Notre Dame didn't lose much from their team last year. They lost some key players, but they didn't lose much.
Yeah.
And Georgia lost a ton, where they're not as prepared to handle losing their star receiver this year.
I agree.
And those type of things. So, and Tennessee, I think, is just ascending. And we talked a lot about what Georgia lost offensively and defensively, player-wise, but they lost Dan Lanning, they lost the receivers coach, they lost their O-line coach. Like, they lost a lot. Yeah. That could be the thing that could cause them to fall a little bit more than just their personnel. If anyone, in my opinion, is going to sneak up on Georgia this year, it will be Tennessee. And there's two reasons why. They have a dynamic quarterback. I love Hendon Hooker.
Yeah.
And he can make plays with his legs. I think they have talent around him and all that kind of stuff. But the other part, too, is your schedule's got to be a part of that as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that helps Tennessee when you kind of look at them. I was actually surprised they weren't getting more preseason love this year with how they played last year. Like, I'm looking at Lindy's. They don't have them in the top 25. But you look at Tennessee, they got 4 of their 5 starting offensive linemen coming back. They have a lot of talent at coming back to skill positions. They're one of the few teams that actually has players coming back at every level of the defense. Almost every team in the East loses almost their entire starting defensive line.
Yeah.
And the East and the West both are dealing with a lot of just like, I'm talking like whole defensive line starters are gone. Tennessee doesn't have as much of that issue. But also, here's the thing that helps them too. They get Florida at home. They get Bama at home. They get Kentucky at home. They get Missouri at home. Their road games, obviously, they play at LSU, who's down this year, in my opinion.
Yeah.
They play at Georgia, which is a battle. And then they have South Carolina and Vanderbilt on the road. Now, to me, all those games, except for Georgia, that they play on the road are teams that I think they have better roster than.
Yeah.
So I could see Tennessee being a team that kind of sneaks up a little bit on people this year. And maybe we're going in November saying, you know what, if Georgia drops another one, Tennessee's rolling, Tennessee may be able to catch them. I think that's the only team that I think right now has a chance to kind of jump up and I'm not predicting it. I'm predicting Georgia to win the East. But let's just say I won't be nearly as shocked this year as I would have maybe been in the past.
Yeah.
To see him win that, to see them win that. So Tennessee is my number 2 team.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. They don't play Georgia head up. No, they play Georgia head up on the road. What I meant to say is that they get Alabama at home. That's going to be very interesting.
And they have given Bama a battle. They have played Alabama tough several times in recent years.
I'm very interested in that game. And the reason I'm interested is because it probably connects to who I have as the number 2 in the West and how they performed against Bama last year. Similarly, with having a very good quarterback that's coming back that can make an impact. That's going to be key to see how they match up, because the way they play Bama before they play Georgia, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Tennessee, yes. Yeah, a couple weeks before.
Yeah, that for me is going to be a litmus test for how I look at that Georgia game.
Yep.
Because as of right now, I think they have a chance in that Georgia game, even though it's on the road.
Right.
Look, Georgia.
Same thing that you and I talked about before that game last year.
Yeah.
It's Georgia's pass defense was not great last year.
No.
And they lost Lewis Cine. Keely Ringo comes back, but he's just one guy.
Right.
And, if Tennessee can find a way to get some big plays, that could be an interesting game. But even if they lose to Georgia, every other conference game they have is winnable except Alabama at home. But again, that's a big rivalry game. I would argue that's considered Tennessee's biggest football rival, correct? Not Kentucky, it's Alabama, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, that's going to be an interesting battle for sure. I'm really curious. And then you get to the battle for the number 3 spot. And I actually think there are 3 teams that could maybe sneak into this role, but
really
2 for sure.
Yeah.
2 for sure.
Yeah.
And obviously right now you and I both have Kentucky number 3. I love what Mark Stoops is building in Kentucky. And he's got some talent coming back too. Here's my big question, Sean. Last year, Kentucky benefited a lot, in my opinion, from the changes that their offensive coordinator brought to the mix.
Mm-hmm.
I thought they were much more capable of going out there and scoring. The year before, in 2020, they averaged 21.8 points per game. Last year, they averaged 32.3. That's an 11-point jump in 1 year. they bring a lot of talent back, but losing their offensive coordinator to the Rams, that's the one big question mark that I'm curious to see how Kentucky can overcome that. Can they keep the offensive growth rolling to really to get to that point? And I'm going to tell you what, it's a big year for them too, because you just got into a verbal public spat with John Calipari in the basketball program. You can't respond with anything less than a good season. Absolutely. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. And the schedule treats them really well.
Yes.
Like their crossover draw was the state of Mississippi. They get Mississippi State and Ole Miss. But the big game on the road at Tennessee, that's going to be the game of the year for them. Yep. They win that game, they could climb up to that 2 spot. They have a shot. I don't think they get there because I do think there are matchups with teams right behind them that are going to be tough with them. They're going to have a matchup with Florida that's going to be tough. So we'll see. But definitely, they have an opportunity that the schedule allows for them to possibly become the second best team in the East.
Yep. I think the thing about Kentucky too is, like, even before you kind of get to that Tennessee game on the road, the part of the reason I have Tennessee ahead of Kentucky is, even though I think Tennessee probably returns a little bit more proven ability, and they were ahead of Tennessee last year, I believe. Correct? I'm gonna look at that now. I thought Kentucky finished second in the East last year. Correct? Yes, they did. They were 5-3. They finished 1 game ahead of Tennessee. This is why you say whenever you're making predictions, it's not always just about who you think necessarily has the best team coming back. It's what does their schedule say? And they were 1 game ahead of Tennessee last year. We just read Tennessee's schedule, right? Yeah. Well, they got, not only does Kentucky have to play at Tennessee, but they have to play at Florida and at Ole Miss. So they caught a break by not getting Bama, but they got to play Georgia at home, which I think Georgia's a bad matchup for Kentucky. Like, football's a game of matchups. Tennessee matches up against Georgia better than Kentucky does, even though Tennessee may not be, a dominant matchup over Kentucky, right? Yeah. But I do think that you have to look at it and see the schedule is, to me, for Kentucky was ultimately the reason why I decided to kind of go away from it. And look, Kentucky lost to Tennessee last year at home.
Yeah.
And so I do think that they're not a great matchup for Tennessee either, but they match up better. So the Florida game, to me, Sean, in week 2 is going to tell us a lot about this battle for the number 3 spot in this division, because Florida's the next team for both of us. Like, South Carolina, I think, is kind of lingering down there. They got Spencer Rattler, who we think is overrated, but still a good quarterback. You got the tight end from Oklahoma. He's recruited well. They've got some talent coming back, really good running back coming back. So South Carolina's lingering, but I think right now Florida still has this is a team, Sean, 2 years ago was in the SEC title. I know they were trash last year, but this isn't a team devoid of talent. It just was one of those years where everything went bad. I think Dan Mullen created a very toxic environment because of some of the coaches he kept around and didn't get rid of. It was a train wreck, if we're going to be honest about it. But Florida didn't all of a sudden stop having talented players. I mean, they're still going to have players. The question is can Billy Napier right the ship, sort of just from what's the character of your football team standpoint? I think that's going to be the bigger question mark for me.
As I previously stated, there's a lot being put on the shoulders of Anthony Richardson, so much that I'm uncomfortable for the young man to have that much pressure on him and expectation. I think by the time September's done, Billy Napier might be regretting taking the Florida job. Like Utah, Kentucky, and Tennessee in the month of September.
He's going to learn a lot about his football team in that first month of the season.
You think?
Yeah.
Especially going up against Utah when the trenches is where he's thin at.
Right.
Like, they have problems. They do return Cox Jr., who's a fantastic pass rusher. But the interior, they have some questions. But like you said, talent's there.
Right.
So they're going to have guys, I think, that can make plays. But that offensive line struggled last year. Made Richardson almost not even try to go through his progression.
Yeah.
Just become a runner immediately. By the time you hit your back foot, I'm looking to run. And if they don't correct that, his development is going to be stunted. He's talented. He can make plays.
That's the key, though, for their whole season, right, Sean?
Absolutely.
I mean, he's getting a lot of hype, and I get it. Big arm, athletic, great frame. He's like, if you're going to build a quarterback in a lab for what he's going to look like physically, like Anthony Richardson's kind of close to that guy, right? You know, but and the thing too is I thought they did him a huge disservice last year. How are you going to throw a kid on the field for his first career start against Georgia? You know, like your team is struggling. You can't protect the quarterback. You're going to throw him in there against Georgia, and you're like, oh, he didn't play well. Shocker. You know, and then they didn't, you know, and then they didn't stick to him the way that they should have, in my opinion. And, you know, you obviously got to stay healthy and all that. But, like, to me, that's a really interesting one for me. Because when I look at just kind of how the season went or how the season is going to go, if he's going to have to live up to the hype for Florida to get to that point. Because like you said, the schedule is not easy. You know, they do not play an easy schedule in 2021. And obviously, or 2022, you talk about Utah, Kentucky, at Tennessee in the first month. Yeah. Missouri's given them problems in recent years. LSU they have obviously at home. That should be one. You got Georgia, you got Texas A&M on the road, and you got to play at Florida State. And Florida State's an ascending team, in my opinion. And we'll talk about them a little bit more when we get to the ACC battle. But Florida State's an ascending football team. So you've got to go to Florida State. So that's my big issue with Florida is I just don't know how – I mean, they got to survive the month of September, as you mentioned, Sean. If they can survive the month of the September, then I think they'll have a shot. But that game against Tennessee, the game against Kentucky, the week after they play Utah, is going to tell me a lot about the culture that Billy Napier is building at Florida. And because win or lose, they're going to get punched in the mouth against Utah. Yeah. And are they, first of all, are they going to punch back? Yeah. Number one. If they win the game, can you keep them locked in and focused to go play Kentucky the next week? Utah's a top 10 team preseason. If you lose, can you get them to bounce back? That's why we said this about Notre Dame. You don't just learn about your team from victory or defeat. You learn about your team no matter the outcome in regard to how you respond the next week. So I think that's, to me, going to be interesting about where they are. Because, again, we think they're battling for that 3-4 spot. I personally think there's a gap between number 2 and the next 2. I think Tennessee is further away from 3 and 4 this year than maybe Kentucky was last year, obviously. I think there's 2 teams clearly better than everybody else, and then 1 team kind of better than everybody in the East. I think 3, 4, and 5 is the battle. I could see Florida finishing 3rd. I could see Florida finishing 5th. Yeah. And I could see Florida going into November with, like, if you don't win this game, you know, against South Carolina, or, you know, A&M on the road in South Carolina, if you don't win both of those games, you could be battling for the 6th spot.
6th spot, yeah.
You know, yeah. So it's going to be really interesting to see how he does. And, you know, sometimes at a program like that, if you don't start off well, you may never get the time and patience to turn it around.
And a lot of times you just don't understand. You've been there inside of programs. I don't think fans really understand because they're so used to the brand and the name Florida and what they've been used to in SEC action. But you really don't know what the foundation of that program looks like after what you just described under Dan Mullen. Like, you know, there might be some foundational things that are going to take a little bit longer.
Right.
Actually get rid of, remove, and build and lay.
Yep.
That might be a little bit more than this season.
Yep.
You know, so Billy Napier has to decide, do I stay true to what's here and to myself and properly build? Like, he's trying to win every football game. And how do I explain this? Because I'm not trying to make it seem like coaches punt on seasons. That's not what I'm saying.
There's more important things than doing whatever it takes to win every game on Saturday. You're trying to establish a culture.
For the overall culture of the program. Right. And like you said, we just don't know. Only Billy Napier knows and his coaches. And like you said, the month of September is going to show them a lot. And it's really going to give them a true answer to what they have and who they are and what they need to continue to do moving forward in the 22 season. I think that's going to be a factor in that race as well. Like, because you just don't know where that program is.
Yeah.
You know, and it might take a little bit more than just walking in and bringing some transfers in and bringing in a nice recruiting class. No, it's a little more than that.
Right now, I have number 5 as South Carolina, and I want to talk about 2 teams together, Sean. I want to talk about 5 and 6 together because we both. You had Florida 4th, correct?
Yeah.
And then we had South Carolina and Missouri 5th and 6th. Where did you have Missouri on that one?
I have Missouri 6th because I actually give South Carolina because I really like the job that Shane Beamer did last year. I think if you watch that program closely and like the games they were in against some good teams, I like what he's establishing. I like the way he's running this program.
They competed.
And I think, look, it's not like Spencer Rattler hasn't shown that he can be a really
He's not a bum.
No.
He was overrated as like a 5-star number 1 player, Heisman, but he's a good quarterback.
Yeah.
And he's certainly better than what they had last year. And they were a mess. They had to get a GA to who's going to coach that year to come and play quarterback for him.
Absolutely.
To me, what I like about South Carolina is they had no business, in my opinion, going 7 and 6 last year. None.
That's what I'm saying.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. They had no business going 7 and 6 last year. They benefited from, Auburn was down, but look, they beat Florida 40-17. They beat Auburn. They battled at Missouri. They competed against Kentucky. And if you go back and watch the game, they didn't Georgia pulled away from them, but it's not like they went into that game just like scared of Georgia. They just didn't have the players to play with them.
Yeah.
But that was a team that beat North Carolina convincingly in a bowl. I mean, they out-coached, outplayed, out-hit, just stomped North Carolina in that game last year, Sean.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really like what Shane's doing. They play tough, and they're going to have more talent this year because they got some transfers in, and and the one thing Shane Beamer's no one has ever questioned about Shane Beamer ever in his career as a coach. Did he get this job because of his dad? Blah, blah, blah. The one thing he has proven without a doubt, he can recruit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he can recruit.
Yeah.
And so they're bringing in more talent. And Missouri's an interesting team too because, Elijah Drinkwitz is really good offensive mind. They're bringing in a really talented recruiting class. I mean, you got Luther Burden coming in. I mean, you've got Sam Horn coming in at quarterback, although he's not going to start this year. Probably Brady Cook, I believe, is going to start. But I'll say this, of all the teams in the SEC, Missouri is the one I have the hardest time evaluating because I just don't know what to expect. There are some games last year I'm like, wow, he's really got this program rolling. And then other games you're like, what in the world are they doing? And it was very kind of bizarre, just really kind of watching it. And there's talent there, but there just seems to be sometimes a little something missing from them. And, 1 week they look like world beaters. The next week they can't do simple things. This is a big year for him because I honestly expected, and maybe this is unfair to them. Maybe this is sort of was my issue. I just expected a lot more of Missouri last year. I just thought they were going to be better. And to go 6 and 7 to me and then to lose to Army in a bowl game was really like, wow. Like every other game I understood.
Yeah.
They lost that ball. They shouldn't have lost to Boston College without Phil Dracovic. That's a bad loss, but it's at an ACC team. Fine. You lost to Kentucky by a touchdown. It's a good football team. You lost to Texas A&M at home. Okay, fine. But you got blown out. Yeah. And Texas A&M wasn't that good last year. You got blown out by Tennessee, 62-24. You got smacked by Arkansas. You got destroyed by Georgia. So like where South Carolina battled, Missouri didn't compete against Georgia last year. And then you bounce back and you beat South Carolina and Florida. They're such a Jekyll and Hyde team. I feel like there's something missing there, and I don't know what it is, and it could just be me and my expectations were too high, and that was unfair on my part.
Yeah. But
I just really feel like there's something missing. But I mean, look, it all sets up. I mean, they got a lot of guys coming back on defense. I think they got like three stars come back on the offensive line. They got Luther Burden, who was a 5-star receiver last year. They got DJ Wesolak. I mean, they had a really good recruiting class last year. They got some transfers coming in. It just, to me, it's just one of those things where I just have no clue what to expect from Missouri. And, it just, I don't know what to expect. So like, I could see them if we're just ranking this by talent, I could see Missouri getting as high as 3rd or 4th.
Yeah.
If they can figure out the quarterback's the big thing, right? Like they need somebody to step up a quarterback.
Yeah. And that's why I give South Carolina the edge with coaching, recruiting, quarterback.
Yep.
Yo, the 2 running backs they have coming back.
Yeah.
The only thing that makes you feel like they're starting the season 0-2 is their crossover schedule.
Yeah.
The fact that they get Arkansas and Texas A&M.
Mm-hmm.
But on the flip side, I think they could be a team that pulls the upset on Texas A&M.
Yeah.
Just the way they play. I really believe that. So, look, Missouri, man, that staff might. You talked about it, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago. That staff may be on the hot seat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ryan. That was Ryan Roberts.
Yeah,
felt
Ryan
that way.
Roberts. Yeah, he pointed it out. Yeah.
And then here's now my counter argument. Well, not counter argument. Here's the big question for me. We're going to know by week 5 who both of these teams are.
Yeah.
Missouri and South Carolina can't hide. Missouri gets Louisiana State Tech in the first game, right? So, it's Louisiana Tech's a quality program. It should be a convincing win, right? Week 2, they go at Kansas State. We're going to learn some about Missouri that week because Chris Klieman's that's a good Big 12 program.
Yeah.
And you got Abilene Christian at home. And you go at Auburn. If you're making a jump this year, Auburn, you want to talk about the dumb. We've talked about several SEC teams are dumpster fires this year. There is no bigger one than Auburn right now. Am I wrong?
Poor Brian Harsin, man.
Yeah, well, he brought some of this on himself.
Yeah, he did.
And then the next week you play Georgia at home, and then the next week you play Florida. Drinkwitz is either going to have that team like 4-2 at worst, and hey, they're heading in the right direction, or he's done.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of how I feel. He's at that kind of and that's kind of crazy to say for a guy that's in like what his 3rd year.
Yeah. Right.
But there's been enough red flags to where if you go out and you get embarrassed by Kansas State and they could conceivably be 2-4 at one point in time, Sean, with wins over Louisiana Tech and Abilene, and then losses at K-State, at Auburn, at Florida, and home against Georgia.
Yeah.
If they're 2-4 at that point, they don't recover. On the other side, you have South Carolina, who kind of has a similar start to the season, but they have a little bit more worked in. Georgia State in the opener should be a win. Then they play at Arkansas and then home against Georgia. It would not be a shock, and actually would be predicted, in my view, that they're going to be 1-2 to start the season. Here's the difference. The next 2 weeks, they play Charlotte and South Carolina State. That to me is how you schedule when you're trying to build a program. When you're at the bottom and you're trying to build that thing up, you schedule teams like Georgia State, Charlotte, and South Carolina State non-conference.
Yeah.
Right? Now, once you built up, you don't keep playing them, right? And that was Art Briles' mistake. He kept playing those teams when he got Baylor going.
Right.
It's like, okay, you're good now. You don't have to keep playing those teams. But that's smart. And then they go at Kentucky and then back-to-back home games against A&M, Missouri, at Vandy, at Florida, home against Tennessee, at Clemson. So, like, their schedule sets up much more favorably than Missouri's. And that is another reason why I went ahead. But Missouri's gonna have a lot to answer for. I mean, they're gonna have to come out right away and be ready to play because their first 6-game stretch is brutal. Vanderbilt, number 7, Love Clarkley. He's got the worst roster in the SEC, and it's not close. I think he's put together a good coaching staff. I really do. I like Larry Black. Obviously my friend Justin is coaching on that staff. He's made some really good hires. He's moved on from hires that weren't good, I think, quickly, smart. But he inherited a bad roster, and although the first recruiting class was pretty decent for them, it's not like a one that puts them on the map. They're a long way away, Sean. That is a complete rebuild. I mean, they were not very good last year. That's being nice. I mean, they lost to East Tennessee State by 20.
And you're talking about a program that 4 years ago was promising.
Yeah.
Like really starting to turn things around and compete.
Yeah.
And the wheels just fell off.
Yeah. This is wild, Sean. They lost by 20 to East Tennessee State. They lost by 18 to Stanford.
Yeah.
Stunk. Lost by 62 to Georgia, 42 to Florida, 39 to Mississippi State, 17 to Kentucky, 14 to Ole Miss, 24 to Tennessee. They had 2 close losses. They lost by 9 to Missouri and 1 at South Carolina. Their 2 wins were a 3-point road win over Colorado State and a 2-point home win over UConn, who's terrible. They got outscored last year 189 to 430. They got a long way to go. A long way to go. So they were one of only three. The next two teams in the conference that got outscored in the year, Sean, South Carolina got outscored in the year by 18, and Missouri got outscored by 62. Like, they got outscored by 241. Like, if that gives you any indication of how bad they were last year. So we don't need to spend a whole lot more time on Vanderbilt. They're really bad, and they're going to stay bad for this year, but I do think they're at least recruiting well, and they have some good coaches.
What year was that they walked into Notre Dame and almost
18?
That pulled the upset? Yeah, they were tough, man. You really thought the program was going to take a turn for the better, but
Derek Mason just couldn't build on it.
Yeah.
I mean, even that game, like, they lost Notre Dame, thinking, wow, they battled Notre Dame, but then the next week they went on the road, or they went back home and against South Carolina at home got beat by 23.
Yeah.
And then the week after that, they beat Tennessee State by 4. So it's kind of like fool's gold a little bit.
Yeah.
They really weren't that good. And then they got to a bowl game against Baylor and got beat. And then the next year they went 3-9. And then after that, they went 0-9 the next year, and he was done.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point in time, he was done. So, and he didn't, there were some things he did that didn't necessarily ingratiate himself. It's like, okay. It's like almost, I was like, if he wanted to get fired, would he have done anything different? You know what I mean? Like, you kind of wonder that. Let's move on to the West, Sean.
Let's do it.
Alabama's the number one team in the division, in the West. There's no doubt. Alabama, I'm fine with people putting Alabama number one preseason in the top 25. We'll do a top 25 show before the season starts. I personally would have Georgia number one, just because my stance. I'm a believer in, you're the champs until somebody beats you, right? Yep. And that's just so. It's not that I think Georgia's the best team. It's just that's a philosophy that I have. Right. But if somebody's going to put Alabama number one, I'm good with it. Right now, Alabama has some question marks. And so this is the thing. There's this assumption Alabama's just going to steamroll everybody. And that may happen. But I do think there are some question marks for me for Alabama. Number one, offensive line. There's one good thing and one bad thing happened to them this offseason. The bad thing, they lost some really good players from their offensive line, especially Evan Neal, who was a high draft pick.
Yeah.
The good news is I actually think they upgraded with the offensive line coach. I was not a big fan. I was not a big fan of the Doug Marrone hire. I thought that was a bad hire. I did.
Yeah.
And the reason I thought it was a bad hire is because that guy had been an NFL head football coach and a Division I head football coach. He was coming to Alabama to kind of get back to being an NFL football coach. You know what I mean? Like, I just didn't see that as being a move that was necessarily a great move. And I don't think their offensive line played great last year. I think they just were really talented, but I don't think they necessarily played great.
They played, you know what? The funny thing is, you're right. I don't think they played great at all, but they had back-to-back really good games in the SEC championship game and then the semifinals against Cincinnati.
But the SEC title game, yes, to a degree. Cincinnati was as much about what is Cincinnati doing, as much as it was them playing well.
Yeah.
But then you look at the new coach, Eric Wolford, who at Kentucky built some really good offensive lines with not having the talent he's going to have at Alabama. I mean, Kentucky had 2 or 3 offensive linemen get drafted last year. Kentucky.
Yeah.
And they got a couple really good linemen coming back. Like, that was a big loss. We didn't talk about that during the Kentucky segment because I knew we'd talk about it here, but I think that's an upgrade. Receiver's an interesting story. Like, Ryan and I have talked a lot about this. He really likes Jermaine Burton, and I think Jermaine Burton's a good player. I think he's going to put up good numbers, but to me, he's not Jamison Williams. He's not John Mechie. He's definitely not Devontae Smith. And then after that, it's kind of like, what do you have after that? You got Tyler Harrell, who wrote a 4.18 or whatever Bruce Feldman said in his Freaks thing. Well, he had 17 catches last year. Like, he couldn't become is he a track guy or is he a receiver? Which one is it? You've got that, young freshman and sophomore classes that are talented, but they didn't really show much last year. You just had JoJo Early just got hurt early, like this week, so he's out. Yes, you have Cameron Latou coming back. You lost some running backs, but they got Jahmyr Gibbs transferring in. You still got Jason McClellan. You still got Trey Sanders. Like, they're very talented on offense, but it's one of those things where Are they going to just steamroll everybody? I don't necessarily see that. And everybody's just assuming they're going to have the best defense of college football this year, and that's the thing I don't get. I think they have some individually great players, but I think as a whole, Alabama's got some question marks, especially in the secondary. They got this guy. Well, they had those guys last year, and they still weren't very good in the secondary. They had those guys 2 years ago, plus you had Patrick Surtain, and you still weren't a real good secondary. Did you see what Kyle Trask did to them in the, you know what I mean, in the semifinal game? The thing that saves them defensively is it really might not matter because you may not have enough time to throw, because you're not only going to have I always forget his name, the defensive end, Will Anderson. I always want to call him Tim Williams. I always want to call him Tim Williams for some reason. You're going to have him on the other side, but now Dallas Turner steps into more of a full-time role. Yeah. And that is about as of an athletic edged combo as you're going to find, in my opinion.
Teams might not have enough time to actually take advantage of the weaknesses.
Right.
Like that, they might be that dominant with the pass rush and the front four.
Mm-hmm.
That you can't go at the safeties.
Right.
You can't go with those at McKinstry,
right.
who struggled as a defensive back. And I don't know if he makes that much of a leap, but they're still going to be young on the back end. They're not big at their linebackers. Maybe you can line up and be physical. But it's just a lot because, they'll move Will Anderson inside.
Right.
In certain situations.
Right.
And just depending upon the offensive line they're going up against. Like they search out the mismatch for him to see whether he can wreck the run game or wreck the passing game. And that's one of the most, it's like anybody else. You trust Nick Saban. That's really what it's all about. Like they lose talent, they get talent. What really sits there is that you trust Nick Saban to have his team ready. And if they slip up, more than likely they go on a run after that loss.
Oh, yeah.
So they might lose a game. They're capable of losing a game. We didn't expect them to lose to Texas A&M, right?
And that's been the weird thing over the years with Nick Saban. Like they never lose. They win every game that's like the big games. Like they win almost every one. They've had a couple against Auburn, but other than that, it's always like they lost at home to Ole Miss.
Yeah,
really? They lost to Texas A&M. Who's Johnny Manziel? It's like that kind of thing, right? It's losing last year to Texas A&M. Like if you'd have gone through the schedule, I don't think that would have been, especially with all the trash talking that Jimbo Fisher was doing during the offseason. Like I thought they were going to go down to College Station and just curb stomp Texas A&M. They always have those weird games like that, but I still do think that, yes, they're not here's my point. They're not the program they were 5, 6, 7 years ago. They're just not that much head and shoulders better than everybody else. But I still think they're probably, like right now, I'd say they're probably the team that if I had to pick a team to win it all, they'd probably be my pick right now. And a big part of it is because I'm really high on Bryce Young, and I think he broke out a year ahead of his schedule. I thought he was going to be good last year, like pretty in numbers would be really good.
Yeah.
But he was so much more poised than I thought. And he's always a smart kid, but he just looked a different level of poised. He just, he talked about that it thing. And Bryce is just special, and it's not like the receivers I have questions about are bums. They're not. They're really good football players. It's just, are they going to be quite as good as they were then? They lose some linemen. It's just, will those little things kind of stack up to maybe catching a loss? Yeah. But even if they lose, they're still going to win the West.
You want guys like that in your program. You can talk about the talent of Dallas Turner, and I'll point back to this. People that watch our show have probably seen me mention it or heard me mention it multiple times. Look, Bryce Young came in and battled for the starting job and felt like he should have been the starter. Mm-hmm. He didn't pout. He didn't act like a brat. He didn't act like someone that was entitled.
Mm-hmm. And he could have been. He was the number one player in the country.
Absolutely. He went, and everything that he heard Mac Jones did, he did it.
Mm-hmm.
He hopped in the film room and watched every piece of tape twice, just like Mac Jones. He put in just as many throws, just like Mac. He raised his level to the expectation of Alabama football. And it's kind of like what we're talking about now. Like, you can come in, I don't care how good you were in high school. This is a totally different beast.
Right.
Like, the level of football we play here, now you have to come up to that level. Mm-hmm. And he took on the challenge. And I think that's why you saw that poise.
Right.
Because he was challenged by the internal workings of the program.
Right.
And when you have a program that can challenge your freshmen to elevate themselves to get to that level just to get on the field, what are they going to face on a Saturday that's tougher than that?
Right.
You know, and that's the process Marcus Freeman is trying to take his players through. Like, I'm trying to get you guys to this level. If you can get here in fall camp,
the talent takes over at that point.
Yeah.
The talent takes over at that point. Who's your number 2, Sean? I've got Arkansas number 2.
Easily Arkansas.
Yeah.
Easily Arkansas. Like, their loss to Alabama was so impressive. Man.
I don't understand. I really don't understand how people can watch those Alabama and Arkansas go through last season and come to the conclusion that somehow Texas A&M should be ranked higher than Arkansas this year. I do not understand it.
No,
I really don't.
Incredible job.
I mean, they even, I mean, look, it's not all about the matchup you had against each other. It's not. But like, they had identical records last year. And in the game they played, they absolutely dominated Texas A&M. You know, you look at their losses, they had really one bad loss. That was the home loss to Auburn. You lost by 15 home to Auburn. That was a bad loss.
Yeah.
And that came right a week after you had lost. You lost at Ole Miss 52-51. I don't know if you watched that game last year, Sean. That was one of the more entertaining games of the season. Alabama outplayed Arkansas for 60 minutes. Like, there was never a doubt that Bama was going to win. But I love the fact that every single time Bama was ready to pull away, Arkansas would claw back in the game.
Yeah.
And I gained a lot of respect. And then how do you bounce back from that loss to Bama? You go out the next week and you smack Missouri in the mouth on short notice. It was a Friday game. It was on short notice. It was on short preparation, I should say, not short notice. Short week of practice. And then you go into the bowl game and you convincingly beat Penn State. It wasn't a great football team, but you convincingly beat Penn State. Georgia was not a bad loss. They got stomped, but I mean, you know, it is what it is. And then they thoroughly outplayed Texas. So I just don't understand why people are looking at Texas A&M and thinking that they somehow should be ranked higher than Arkansas. It does not make a lot of sense to me. It really doesn't.
It's interesting you say that, because matchups make fights, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think they had the matchup to be effective. They want to be physical and establish the line of scrimmage. And then they had Trayvon Burks, which is a big play guy. And they wanted to take advantage of you, play action and with movement in the pocket. And that, when they had time to throw against Alabama, they were able to make chunk plays against that secondary that was available. Like, you can make big plays against that Alabama secondary last year if you were able to execute and give your quarterback time to throw, and you had a quarterback that could go ahead and make the plays. He also made plays with his legs off schedule, which always hurts Alabama defenses historically. And that reminds me of the way we talk about Arkansas is the way we kind of talked about Penn State previously in the Big Ten preview. Like, you know, just really, you know, look at the way they played Ohio State. Like, if they can get things together, that quarterback comes back healthy, and everything stays the way it is, they didn't match up with Georgia.
Right.
Because trying to establish yourself.
They're a physical smash mouth football team that is playing a team that's that way too, but they're way more talented.
Yeah,
right.
It's just a bad matchup.
Right.
It's a bad matchup. So before they could even get to their play action, you know, pocket moving game,
right,
they couldn't even establish the foundation of what they wanted to do, and just got behind and then had to throw, and everything, you know, was just up in the air after that point. But no, they are, in my opinion, much better because of Sam Pittman and the job that he's done recruiting. Sam Pittman has been in recruiting wars with Notre Dame recently, which says a lot about where he's taking that program. He actually won a battle in the class of 23, and he lost a battle in the class of 23. So, and his class that's coming in is pretty good. So, you know, when you have the trenches on both sides, a quarterback, the difference is who's going to be that playmaker. Brian? Who's going to step up and take the place of Trevon Burks, make those big plays?
That's the big question.
That's the big question.
Yeah.
And if they can find someone, to step up from that young receiving core, then they're going to be cooking with grease.
Yeah.
Down in Fayetteville. But
I love KJ Jefferson. I do. He's
too.
not sexy. He's not going to throw for 4,000 yards, but man, the kid's just a gamer.
Yeah.
And that game against A&M wouldn't have been as a competitive. He doesn't go down in that game. When he got knocked out, that I mean, Arkansas was basically just like, look, we've got this one. Here's the thing for me too with them is they do have 4 starters coming back on the offensive line. They got Jadon Hazelwood, who transferred in from Oklahoma, who was a 5-star recruit. He's got to get himself back on track. Never thought he was a 5-star recruit, but he's got some talent. He's a kid that's got to step up and fill that role. But Treylon Burks was a really good football player for them last year. The schedule's interesting, too, when you look at Arkansas. They start the season off against Cincinnati. That's going to tell us a lot. And then really the next 2 games, they're at home against South Carolina, home against Missouri State. They should be 3-0 to start the season.
Yeah.
The next month is gonna determine their season, Sean. They play Texas A&M in Arlington, right? So okay, you got to continue establishing that dominance.
Yeah.
Then they play Alabama at home, right? That's going to be really interesting. Then they play at Mississippi State, at BYU, and then at Auburn. If they can get through that stretch with just 2 losses, they finish the season off at home against Liberty, LSU, and Ole Miss, and then at Missouri. That's a sneaky 10-win schedule right there. If they can just survive that, they got to beat Cincinnati opener. That's the first question mark, right?
Yeah.
You should. And this isn't a knock on Cincinnati, but Cincinnati lost a ton off their football team.
They did.
And Arkansas has a lot coming back. And so if you win that game, you're 3-0. Then it's the A&M game. If you can win that game, you're Arkansas could be, because like I said, if they're 4-0 after Alabama, Sean, after Texas A&M, Alabama at home, at Mississippi State, at BYU, at Auburn, then 3 straight home games against Liberty, LSU, Ole Miss, and then at Missouri. They are I'm telling you, they're a sneaky 10-win football team this year if they can get through Cincinnati and A&M with wins. And neither of them are road games. They get Cincinnati at home and A&M in Arlington. It's a neutral site game for both of them. That's why Arkansas is my sneaky number 2 team in the conference this year. I don't think they're going to challenge Bama, but I think they're a team, meaning for the division, but I think they're a team that I'm really curious to see how they're going to do this year. Very curious how they're going to do. And A&M, I'm just not a believer. They weren't that good last year.
No.
They lost most of their best players. Max Johnson's a nice quarterback if he can stay healthy, but I just don't get. It's like they're the new Michigan. It's like they predict Michigan ever since Harbaugh got there. This is the year Michigan turns the corner and is a great team. That's what A&M is now.
Yeah.
How can you look at that? Well, they went 9-1, so you're going to take that one anomaly in a year where they only played SEC teams and ignore the 2 years before and the year after. That's what we're doing here now. Okay, makes total sense. I don't get the love fest with them at all. I really don't. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's not a lock they're going to beat Miami in the 3rd game of the year at home. It's not a lock.
No. I agree. So Arkansas, look, I think KJ Jefferson is going to be so supremely confident this year. And Hazelwood might take that next step. He might. So I stopped short. Oh man. If it wasn't for Bryce Young, I would say they have a chance to upset Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
If it wasn't for Bryce Young.
Yeah.
I just feel like that dude it's very few quarterbacks that can pick a team up in the midst of a game and say, you know what?
Yeah.
Get on my back.
I also think they're going to have a hard time protecting KJ for 60 minutes this year. Arkansas's got a really tough physical offensive line. I don't know if they can handle that edge for 60 minutes enough to win the game.
Yeah.
I don't. I think the key for them is they're going to have to come out and establish the ground game. They're going to have to be able to run the ball. If they can run at Bama, then I think they have a shot. in that. I do
Yeah.
to keep it competitive. And then maybe if there's a mistake, I mean, it's going to require Bama to make some mistakes for Arkansas to win it.
Right.
A&M to me, I think is number 3, but I don't actually. You know what? Actually, I go away from that. I'm sorry. I don't have A&M number 3.
Okay.
I don't. And this is sort of my surprise pick because it's partly my a surprise pick of the West, but it's more about I just don't. And no one's talking about the fact they lost Mike Elko. No one's talking about that. They're just assuming that. And here's the other part about A&M. I think Alabama is going to so thoroughly destroy their soul when they play that I don't think they're going to be able to recover. I don't. I think they're not only going to lose to Bama. I think they're going to lose the next week to South Carolina because they're going to be so thoroughly destroyed mentally and emotionally from what Alabama's going to do to them this year that I think they lose the next week as well.
Well,
that's my take on Texas A&M. I also really like what Mike Leach is doing at Mississippi State. I think they're going to surprise some people this year. They got a quarterback coming back who's not super talented, but super productive. I think he's going to be better this year. Finally has some weapons to throw to. I think Mississippi State's going to surprise some people, and I have 2 reasons for that, Sean. Number one, like I said, you're now going into what? This is going to be Mike Leach's 3rd season. So you have a system that they know. I think they were a play here, a play there last year from being a much better football team. They lost by 3 points at home to LSU. I still can't believe they lost that game. Alabama smacked them. They lost by 3 points at Arkansas. They lost by 10 against Ole Miss. It was a competitive-ish game. It was a weird game. And then lost it to Memphis, which was a weird game. But they beat A&M at A&M. They beat NC State by 2 touchdowns. NC State was a good football team last year. They beat Kentucky by 2 touchdowns. They smacked Auburn on the road. So I actually like what they're doing. I think they bring back enough this year on defense. I think they're going to get better on defense. And when I look at their schedule, they got Memphis at home on the opener, and then they play at Arizona. That should be 2-0, although Arizona, I think it's going to be better. I like what Judd Fish is doing there. He's getting, there's nowhere to go but up, right? But, how much up are they going to go? Then they're at LSU. That should be a W. That early in Brian Kelly's tenure, this is not Brian Kelly's, he's got a lot to overcome. That's legitimate. Bash him and all that. We'll get to LSU, but that should be a win for Mississippi State. If they can't beat LSU that early in the season with all the issues going on with LSU, then they might be in trouble. But then they got Bowling Green at home, A&M at home, and Arkansas at home before they go at Kentucky, at Bama. Then they're back home, Auburn, Georgia, East Tennessee State before they go at Ole Miss. That's a much more favorable schedule, in my opinion, than what Texas A&M is dealing with this year. Again, that factors into it as well. A&M this year, as I mentioned, they have Miami in week 3. After playing Sam Houston State and App State. Then they're Arkansas on the road, at Mississippi State, at Alabama, at South Carolina, home against Ole Miss and Florida, then at Auburn, and then they finish against UMass and LSU. Now, I will say this. If Alabama gets through the Florida game with 2 losses, if A&M gets through Florida with 2 to 3 losses, then I think that I'll change my opinion because they're going to finish up at Auburn, home against UMass, and home against LSU. So if they're at 2 losses after Florida, they're going to be number 2 in the West, in my opinion. But I think they're going to have more than 2 losses at that point in time. So that's why I have Mississippi State ahead of A&M. What is your 3-4 at this point, Sean? You're muted.
A&M is my 3rd team.
Okay.
I'm just going to go ahead and stick and I think they're going to be able to. I told you, I think South Carolina gets them. Mm-hmm. So I do expect an upset, but I think they hold down the 3rd spot. And particularly because it's going to take LSU another year to really become a force in the West. You know what? And a lot of people, and I say this and I'm honest, man. One thing, you can say what you want to about Lane Kiffin. The dude can develop quarterbacks. He can get quarterbacks down there, figure out how to make them really good.
When they got Jackson Dart, who was a highly ranked kid 2 years ago, transferred in from USC.
Absolutely. So I just really think he's going to find a way to get that offense to produce, and I understand what you're saying. I think one of the Mississippi schools jumps up and has an opportunity to bite Texas A&M and possibly get that third slot. But I think Texas A&M is able to do it. And then I have the Mississippi schools. Probably would lean to Ole Miss over Mississippi State just because of, both guys can coach the quarterback.
Yeah.
Honestly. Yeah. What you're talking about, I just think I might take the talent at Ole Miss a little bit more than the talent at Mississippi State, but it's going to be I think both East and West in the middle are very volatile. It's going to be very volatile.
You're thinking it's a lot like, and I agree. I think you're thinking the West after Arkansas is going to be a lot like the East. Could be a lot of – Ole Miss is an interesting one because I have them fifth for a couple reasons, Sean. Number one is I don't think their schedule's tough. I think for the draw they get this year's not great, in my opinion. So, you go down through it. They got to play Troy, Central Arkansas, at Georgia Tech, Tulsa, Kentucky. Starts off well, Vanderbilt, but then the final 6 games are not. Auburn at home, at LSU. And the reason I say at LSU, now you're talking about 6-7 games in. LSU should be kind of coming into their own a little bit. At A&M, home against Bama, at Arkansas, home against Mississippi State. Like, I could see them winning a bunch of those games. I could see them losing most of those games too. Yeah. The problem for me with Ole Miss and why I have them lower, they can end up probably maybe making me look bad a little bit. I do think the Jeff Lebby loss hurts. I do think Jeff Lebby's a good football coach, and I think replacing him with Charlie Weiss Jr. isn't exactly. And this isn't a shot to Charlie Weiss Jr. He's good up and coming coach. But Jeff Lebby's just a better football coach right now at their stage in their careers. Yeah. So please don't take that as an attempt to disparage Charlie Jr. I'm not getting into that stuff. I got no beef with what's going on there. Lane Kiffin's not hiring him as a favor to Charlie Weiss. He clearly thinks the kid can coach. But Jeff Lebby's a better coach at this stage in their coaching careers.
Agreed.
But I just feel like there's such a small margin for error with Ole Miss. I still don't think they have necessarily the depth. They lost some really good players from their team last year. They had a lot of wins.
He did do a good job in the transfer portal. I think they were
but I don't know if Lane is capable of bringing a team together that's filled with a bunch of transfers. That's kind of my thing. That's my concern. I
like the Zach Evans pickup at running back.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. I like that pickup.
And like I said, they got a receiver. I'm completely drawing a blank.
I know Michael Trigg from USC.
He's a tight end. Yes,
he transferred in. I think who's that receiver they got? They got 2 receivers: Jalen Robinson from UCF and Jordan Watkins from Louisville.
Yes, Jordan Watkins is the kid I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So I just don't have the confidence in Lane to be able to bring that all together.
Yeah.
Now the counter argument is he's got a lot of games to get right where they're going to be the better team. And I think that's where the schedule's favorable in that regard. It's just if they don't have it figured out by then, the end of the schedule's tough for a team that I don't think has great depth. And that's kind of my issue. But if Ole Miss finishes third, am I going to be shocked? No. If they finish second, would I be shocked? A little bit. But I also wouldn't be shocked if they finish fifth, in my opinion. 6 and 7, I have LSU 6, Auburn 7.
Yeah.
I could easily see that flipping. I just feel like Auburn is just a mess right now, an absolute mess. And I know the kid catches a lot of crap, but I thought Bo Nix was kind of coming into his own last year when he got hurt. I did. And, they just utterly collapsed down the stretch. Just choked away that game. The Alabama loss showed me 2 things about Auburn, Sean. They still have good players, and they don't know how to play football. Just little things like running out of bounds twice.
The game was over.
Yes. Running out of bounds twice.
Yeah.
And I always felt like Bo Nix just never got the respect that he deserved as a player. He won them games last year, and some of the games they lost, like the loss to Mississippi State, Bo played really well that game.
Yeah.
And then gets hurt. I just don't feel like their roster's as good, and they lost some players, and he hasn't recruited very well. I don't think their roster's capable of that. I actually think they still have probably better players top to bottom than LSU, because LSU lost a ton of dudes from their team.
Yeah.
But say what you want about Brian Kelly, and I have a lot to say about Brian Kelly. I mean, his team is going to be better coached than Auburn. They will. They'll be more disciplined than Auburn. I mean, and it's not just him. They got, Mike Denbrock's a good football coach.
Yeah.
I liked his defensive coordinator hire. I really did. The linebacker coach from Kansas City. I think he's a good football coach. I think that Brian Kelly is not going to take them beyond, like, to a championship. He's not that kind of coach. I think they're going to struggle because they don't have good talent. But I don't think that they're going to be like this. Like, they're not going to be like Auburn.
Yeah.
They're very similar roster-wise, but I have a whole lot more faith that Brian Kelly's going to get that team to play okay than I do that Brian Harsin is going to get his team where it's going to go.
Yeah. This is a domino question. I know you probably can't give me a bullseye answer because there are so many moving parts to it. If his master plan had worked and he got Marcus and Tommy to go to LSU, where do you think you would rank LSU?
Oh, definitely higher.
Yeah,
because I think they would have kept a lot. They would have kept a lot of the. It would have kept a lot of the guys that they lost. I think a lot of those guys they would have kept. Well, some of the guys that they lost. So to me, Sean, that's kind of where I look at it. I think they have. I think Tommy with. I don't. Here's the thing. Depends on whether or not Brian Kelly would have let Tommy kind of manage the roster. But here's the issue I have with LSU. He's doing the same crap at quarterback that he did Notre Dame. He's giving like 4 guys equal reps. And, it's like, who's the guy? And it's like, what are you doing? Like, this is the stuff you did at Notre Dame that never worked. But he's going to have weapons. I mean, he's got one of arguably the best receiver in college football. I mean, that kid's a monster. They've got talent coming back at certain positions. They're going to be coached well. They're going to be a solid, sound, fundamental football team. I don't know if he can control that that locker room. That's a question. LSU's a little bit of a different animal in that regard. But for me, Sean, I just feel like, to me, there's just no doubt that their football team would be a little bit more talented had Marcus especially came. I don't know if Tommy would have had the same impact because I don't know how many kids at LSU would have had any clue who Tommy Reese is. They should, but I don't know if they would. And I think Mike Denbrock's a good football coach. I think Marcus Freeman would have won some of those recruiting battles down the stretch. Because in Coach House's defense, he was coaching in the playoffs during that period of time. When Marcus Freeman's out recruiting for Notre Dame or would have been recruiting for LSU, he was out coaching in the playoffs. There was only so much he could do, and it's not like he had a head coach that was going to go on the road and do the work that he couldn't do, because he was coaching in the playoffs. So I just feel like they would have kept better players, and there'd be a no-brainer. I mean, I'd be talking about maybe LSU being higher than 6th.
Yeah.
5th or 4th, because they would have kept some of those good players, and Tommy would have that offense, innovative and all those type of things. So, but Auburn to me is the other part of the Auburn thing, Sean, is I don't think their head coach is going to be there all season. And that to me is going to do one of two things. And this is what I don't know. Does that mean that they fall apart, or does that mean that they rally? Because here's the issue with Auburn. Not only do they have all the issues, they have a brutal schedule. They start off with Mercer and San Jose State. Okay, that's fine. They got to play Penn State at home. You and I both think Penn State's going to be a better football team this year. Then they got Missouri at home, LSU at home. Then they play at Georgia, at Ole Miss, home against Arkansas, at Mississippi State, home against A&M, home against Western Kentucky, and at Alabama. Like, to me, those are some bad blowout losses on their schedule. And so by the end of Missouri, we're going to know if he's even going to have a job. If they lose to Penn State and Missouri, I think he's done. And I think that either they fire him, or the rumblings are so loud that the players just start tuning them out because they're like, dude, you're going to get fired anyway. I'm not listening.
Yeah.
A guy who I don't think they overly respect anyway from some things I've heard and you read and all that kind of stuff. And then if you're able to somehow survive that, you got to go back-to-back games against Georgia and Ole Miss. And then you come home for that nice little get yourself right game against Arkansas. And then you're back at Mississippi State. Then you're A&M at home. And then if you are able to survive all of that, you got to go to Tuscaloosa to end the season. So I just think Auburn's going to be in trouble. I think they're going to be in a lot of trouble this year.
Yeah, I forecast. I don't know about him not making it the full season, but it's going to be tough. It's going to be turbulence.
Yes.
All year.
Yes.
It's going to be pretty. He'll learn from this.
Yeah.
Hopefully, he learns from this in life and in his coaching career.
Yeah. Learn from it somewhere else. He'll learn from it and apply it at his next head coaching job. Because I don't think he necessarily wants to be. I mean, would you want to be there where you're surrounded by boosters who are just constantly trying to undermine you?
Right?
Yes.
Like fire me if you're going to fire.
Yes. Exactly. I'm
not walking away to do you a favor.
Right. Exactly.
You don't want me here? Let me go.
Fire me and give me my
give me my money.
Yeah. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Give me my buyout.
Yeah.
And that's what he should do.
Yeah.
To be honest with you. And to me, it's I think they're going to struggle. Yeah. The schedule, the turmoil, the talent's not as good as it has been. I mean, you're hoping you're going to ride TJ Finley to victories. Come on now. Like that's not. And look, I love Tank Bigsby, but I still just can't get over him running out of bounds last year in that game. I still can't do it. But, you're talking about, LSU, to me, we're talking about the quarterbacks that they need to figure out. I take all three of the kids in the battle at LSU over TJ Finley.
Yeah.
All three of them. I'll take Jaden Daniels. I'll take Nussmeier. I'm trying to even think of the other kid that they have. They got Walker. I mean, I'll literally take any scholarship quarterback LSU has over TJ Finley. Like, he's bad. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting. And as I said in a show yesterday, I believe the Auburn boosters have a insane lack of self-awareness of who they are as a program and respect for just decent human decency.
And you don't realize how the Auburn program being what it is and the LSU program being what it is, like how that really impacts recruiting.
Oh, yeah.
Like when you see programs like that down, that's when it's time to swoop in and really dig into those states, especially dig into Texas, Louisiana, and kids that would have gone to those schools, they end up at Notre Dame or they end up at Ohio State. They come north, So you have maybe another year to maybe get on kids in 24.
Yeah.
But I think eventually LSU will get there.
Sure.
They'll build their fence around.
Well, they just got Shelton Sampson the other day. They got Ricky Collins.
Yeah.
But they're going to lose more in-state battles than they have. But I mean, look, Brian Kelly, I've had friends say he'll be fired by the third year. I don't see that.
He's a good head coach, man. He's a good coach.
He's not a great coach.
No.
He pissed me off. He doesn't deserve as much credit as he gets for Notre Dame. There's a lot of things about Brian Kelly I don't like. But Brian Kelly's won everywhere he's ever been. And it's not going to just all of a sudden change because I dislike him. So this year's going to be tough for him, though.
Yeah.
Because the roster's just not good because of how many kids they lost.
Yeah.
And their schedule's brutal. So the key for me, it's kind of like we talked about earlier, Sean. I mean, you're talking about they play Florida State in the Superdome. That's not a given. That game's not a given.
No.
Then 2 weeks later, they play Mississippi State at home, not a given, at Auburn, home against Tennessee, at Florida, home against Ole Miss, home against Alabama, at Arkansas, home against UAB, who, by the way, many people think may be a gimme. That team won 10 games last year, or 9 games last year. Excuse me. They went 9-4 last year. They went 6-3 the year before that. 9-5 the year before that. This isn't your typical crap non-conference late season blowout victory given. UAB is a good football team, and then they end the season against Texas A&M at Texas A&M. So the schedule's pretty rough too. So Brian Kelly's going to use a million excuses because that's what he does. But honestly, in this instance, a lot of them are going to be kind of, he's not wrong. You know what I mean? Like he shouldn't use them, but he's not wrong. So, but they're going to struggle this year. But as you said, they'll be all right moving forward. They'll be all right. But they're not going to be the program people. They're not going to be what LSU fans think he's going to make them. That's what they won't be. But he's not going to be this 4-8 team that gets fired in 2 years that Notre Dame fans think he's going to be. The only concern I have is if he doesn't kind of show something this year, we are talking about the SEC. We are talking about fan bases and boosters, group of boosters and donors that don't really see the world the way they should see the world. That's my only concern. You know what I mean? So I'm hoping he's shaking hands and kissing babies this year to keep people on his good side, because he's going to need patience that first year. He's going to need patience that first year. There's no doubt about it.
I totally agree with that, man.
Yeah, so that's gonna do it for today's show, everybody. Thank you all so much. We did have 2 super chats I wanted to bring out before we leave. Michael Marshall, thank you for your super chat. With the loss of AD, what's the number Notre Dame needs to hold OSU to win now? Doesn't change. That doesn't change. Again, Avery Davis was not going, in my opinion, is not the kind of loss that all of a sudden means you've got to now hold them to 17 points. You can't win. And then we did have a super sticker from Justin. Appreciate that very, very, very much, Justin, also. So that's it for today, everybody. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. Look out, sign up to our new show. So Sean will be one of, obviously, the early publishers of that show. He'll be one of the early hosts of those shows. So he's going to have his Down and Distance show. Going to be a lot of fun. Still hammering out the details of when we're going to start and what the topics and the format are going to be, but I just know it's going to be really good because that's what we do. That's what Sean does. So make sure you definitely check that out. And we'll have something from John Garcia Jr. coming up this week as well. He's going to review you kind of look back at the SI 99, talk quarterbacks, talk best position groups. We'll have some fun with him on that one. So for Sean Davis, I'm Brian Driscoll. Everybody have a great rest of your day. And we will see you again on Monday at 1:00 for our next Irish Breakdown podcast.